Chapter 51. Vulcan thought about many situations, and he even thought that the opponent would shoot arrows to suppress it. You must know that it is still difficult to train archers in this era. At first, Vulcan guessed that the opponent did not fire arrows because the opponent could not be all trained archers, but only some crooked melons, so he could only wait until he got closer. Shoot again. But Vulcan didn't expect that the other party threw a strange thing. Was it a stone? Or something else? Before he had time to think, the scout on the flank received a grenade in his very unlucky face. Boom. Suddenly, a piercing explosion sounded in Vulcan's ears, followed by a suffocating wave of flying smoke and debris. The cavalryman suddenly reined in, and the horse neighed in terror. To the side, the scout's figure was instantly swallowed up by a ball of fire and debris. The fragmentation grenade exploded in midair, releasing countless deadly metal fragments, sweeping across like a metal storm. The scout's armor was torn apart by the impact of the explosion, and the armors of the cavalry nearby were stained with the scout's blood almost instantly. The hearts of the blood-stained cavalry tightened suddenly, as if they were tightly grasped by an invisible hand. The pain and horror on their faces could not be concealed at all, and they were completely unable to understand what was happening. Although more grenades were thrown around the cavalry, without causing any greater casualties, the bursts of explosions and the tragic corpses of teammates made it difficult for these demon soldiers to stay rational. The demon cavalry, which had not fought against the wind for a long time, immediately panicked and pulled the reins in panic. In addition, the horses were already frightened, and the entire cavalry team began to lose control. Vulcan, the leader of the team, did not fare well either. He thought he had been ambushed and the other party sent powerful professionals and used undetectable spells to attack. Vulcan still wanted to wait until the opponent's magic power was exhausted before regaining his strength, but the terrifying bombing did not stop at all. Only then did Vulcan realize that the terrifying explosion was caused by the opponent's thing that looked like a magic prop. Lowry even used a 3-stage attack method to throw grenades to ensure suppression. Moreover, because the demon cavalry charged forward, most of the grenades were even thrown behind these cavalry. Charge! Charge! Come on! Vulcan was a little crazy. Don't these magic props cost money? Why didn't he feel bad at all when they were thrown to the other side? Vulcan even quickly recalled in his mind which lords he had offended after entering the broken snow territory, and wanted to put himself to death like this. But it was too late. The basic qualities of a warrior made Vulcan realize that he could only charge now. The explosion of the opponent's magic item was so terrifying that it was definitely impossible to use it at close range. Retreating was definitely impossible. The only way now was the solution is to rush directly into the opponent's face and engage in hand-to-hand combat. Although several demon soldiers stopped in place because their horses were injured by grenade fragments, the cavalry around Vulcan still rushed forward after Vulcan. Lowry drew his sword without hesitation and shouted, "Go to the sword. Brothers, kill one to earn your base, kill two to earn blood. Kill them for me." After saying that, he followed the secretary and took the lead in charging forward. Although the warhorse was frightened and the acceleration distance was not enough when the charge was relaunched, causing Vulcan's charge to be greatly reduced, the sense of oppression brought by the warhorse was still there, and the demon cavalry stepped into the military formation. Under the influence of adrenaline, the heavily armed soldiers began to transform into terrifying upright apes. Some were responsible for chopping the horse's legs, while others picked up hammers to break the armor. The scene quickly fell into a melee. Bjorken quickly realized the gap in equipment between the two sides. In close combat, he couldn't beat these inferior humans at all. The only thing that caused the most damage to these humans was the charge of the first wave of war horses. The remaining humans surrounded the cavalry and began to attack like war madness. The most terrifying thing is that these attacks are orderly, with 3 people working together as a group. In the melee, the numerical advantage was immediately reflected, and the Vulcan team, with only a dozen people left, immediately seemed to be stuck in a quagmire. What made Bjorken most desperate was that not only were these soldiers well equipped, Bjorken even saw some of them fighting with recovery potions in their mouths. At this cost, it is too exaggerated to kill his own cavalry team regardless of the cost. "I surrender! I surrender!" Immediately, a demon soldier saw the gap and raised his hands directly, but the soldier with red eyes didn't care about it. He hit the demon soldier's head with a hammer and cursed, "I don't need you greens for mining." Skin. Generally speaking, refusing to surrender will stimulate the fighting spirit of the defeated army and allow the defeated army to make a final desperate fight. But the demon soldiers did not expect that these humans themselves fought with a desperate attitude. Some of the soldiers who came from the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Rescue even cried while killing them. Their madness made these demon soldiers even more frightened. Fortunately, the number of these human soldiers was not large enough to crush them. Vulcan escaped with 2 loyal attendants relying on the only warhorse wearing a vest. After all, these humans are all infantry, and the horses in the carriage are just horses used for transportation. As long as they escape the quagmire of the melee, Vulcan can go away. "You inferior humans, eat my shit." Vulcan kept taunting while escaping, but what he wanted in his heart was to never step into human territory again. When you return to the demon territory, you must report to the Demon King that these inferior humans have broken their promise. Didn't he just conduct human experiments on humans, make these people infected with a lot of plagues and curses, and then drive these people back to continue spreading plagues and curses? But these humans actually broke the contract they signed with each other and directly conducted experiments on themselves. Killing is too much. Hey, that's just what inferior humans are like. Vulcan seemed to be trying to regain some of the superior self-esteem of the demons. While riding on horseback, he said to the 2 attendants beside him, "If I were the commander of this army, I would arrange an ambush here, and then. Before Vulcan could finish speaking, the two attendants suddenly saw the flags flying in front of them, and a group of fully armed cavalry were waiting for them. If the equipment of the previous soldiers made Vulcan feel exaggerated, the cavalry in front of him was despairing. Even without reconnaissance scouts, Vulcan could feel that all the cavalry in front were professionals, without any exception. These cavalrymen wore pure white armor, with the Lars family's Northwind bear emblem tattooed on their flags and cloaks. Each one of them was soothing the eager war horses under their crotches. Vulcan could even feel that even if these cavalry were wearing fully armed equipment, the horses under their crotches could still allow these cavalry to move swiftly on the battlefield. This is not an ambush. The combat effectiveness is even more exaggerated than that of the regular army. Even the main human force that Vulcan saw on the battlefield was nothing more than this. Following a wave from the leading female knight, the knights in the front row immediately jumped out and headed straight for Vulcan. Vulcan and the two attendants wanted to use blood magic to resist, but those magic wind blades dissipated like raindrops when they hit the knights. Before he could say surrender, Vulcan felt the world spinning. It wasn't until he saw his body that Vulcan realized that it was not the world that was spinning, but his head. Chapter 52. Caroline was completely confused because Isa had lost the holy light, so as a professional, Caroline led the soldiers to the location of the nuns and refugees. The scout said 1,000 words, but Caroline was not as shocked as seeing it with her own eyes. A picture of hell that was even more terrifying than what Caldic had described was truly displayed in front of Caroline, but Caroline was not happy at all. She even hoped that it was all just a nightmare. Lady Flora. Seeing Flora, who was covered in curses, Isa didn't feel disgusted at all. Instead, she was so excited that she wanted to hug Flora. As long as she is alive, for Isa, she is already happy as long as the people who saved the Our Lady of Cathedral are still alive. After seeing the human soldiers coming, Flora's first reaction was to worry, fearing that the plagues around her would infect them, but when she saw Isa, Flora's face showed an expression of surprise. Little Isa. Flora stood up excitedly and wanted to hug Isa as before, but just as she stood up, Flora immediately stepped back and warned loudly, "Don't come over." Isa froze on the spot, the stench irritating Isa's nasal cavity, making her immediately realize again the refugee camp that used to be called Hell. The soldiers stayed outside the white line drawn by the alchemy powder to prevent infection from the plague. At the same time, they observed the battle situation in the distance to prevent the demon soldiers from coming back. When seeing the miserable situation of the nuns and refugees, these soldiers even regretted why they were not the ones fighting against the demons in the distance. Caroline took out 2 silk scarves and handed one to Isa. The silk scarf is covered with alchemy powder and medicinal materials, which are used to prevent epidemics. Not far away, carriages carrying medical equipment, hot water equipment and holy water were also constantly arriving. Little Isa, is it really you? Flora still couldn't believe the scene in front of her. 2 teams of human soldiers suddenly appeared. The order was strict and the division of labor was orderly. One team protected the refugees and the other fought against the demons. Moreover, Isa also appeared in front of her. There seemed to be something in the distance. Medicines are being delivered in a steady stream. For Flora, who had experienced despair, this was so dreamy that Flora even felt that this was the hospice care given to her by the goddess. Lord Flora, how is the situation now? What kind of curses have been planted by the demons? What kind of plagues? I'll prepare the medicine. Looking at the anxious Isa, Flora also reacted, but said sadly, useless little Isa, any medicine is useless, we are all dying, in fact there are already many brothers and sisters I almost couldn't hold on anymore on the road, and the demons forced me to save everyone's lives, but we are reaching our limit. Thank you, little Isa, but maybe for us, being burned to death is the best ending, and it is best to bury it with lime. That is enough. While Flora and Isa were talking, a nun ran to Flora and shouted, the saint is in trouble, a sister is about to drown. Drowned? Caroline, who was wrapping her head in a silk scarf, couldn't understand it at all. Isn't there no water nearby? How could someone drown? Flora and Isa rushed over immediately and found that yellow-green liquid was constantly coming out of a nun's mouth and nasal cavity. Only then did Caroline realize what the so-called drowning meant. For a moment, Caroline even had the urge to vomit. This was not because she was disgusted by the nun in front of her who was about to drown in her own pus, but because she was wondering what on earth she had been doing in the past. She was actually following Caldic to fight for the demons. Waving the flag and shouting. Isa also reacted immediately, straightened the nun on the ground without hesitation, stuffed her fingers into the other person's mouth, and forcefully dug out the pus from the other person's throat and nasal cavity. The nun was lying on the ground, vomiting in pain, and Isa could only pat her back in distress. Why do you want to save me? The nun who was rescued collapsed and shouted to Isa, I'm obviously about to die. As long as I die, I won't have to suffer anymore. Why did you save me? When Isa was at a loss, Flora crossed over to Isa and gently hugged the nun. Sister, no matter what the circumstances, we cannot treat our lifesaver like this. I'm sorry, Lady Flora, I just... The nun broke down and cried. Lady Flora, the Lord of the Grey and White Collar has prepared a potion for you. As long as the potion arrives, not only will it cure you, but it will at least alleviate everyone's pain. Isa also wanted to hold Flora's hand, but Flora quickly pulled it away. Thank you to this kind Lord, but unless the goddess brings a miracle and brings endless holy water, we may not be saved. Any measures are just a delaying measure, so please Isa, at least don't let the sins are getting worse, okay? While talking, Linde and Reina had already arrived at the location of the refugees. Scarlet Saint Flora didn't have much of a role in the original work, and Linde didn't know her very well, but for someone who treated illnesses and saved people on the frontier, and could also calm the emotions of his companions in such desperate situations, Linde it's very respectful. He is worthy of being Isa's mentor in this world line. Just looking at these nuns and refugees will make people's hair stand on end. It's hard to imagine how Flora got here. Reina's knights even forced Reina back, fearing that Reina would be infected with the plague. Lord. Caroline saw Linde first and saluted him. Isa also introduced Linde to Flora. This is the Grey Collar Lord, Viscount Linde Roll, and his fiancée copyrightee, Ms. Lena Lars. When she heard Lena's last name, Flora was startled at first, but she quickly returned to normal. Flora used her weak body to salute Linde. Thank you for your kindness, Lord. Your wisdom and courage are obvious to all. Linde accepted the gift calmly and responded with the same level of courtesy. My Lady Saint, you are the strongest person I have ever seen. I wish all of you a recovery. Unless the goddess personally sends a miracle. Flora showed a helpless smile. There will be a miracle. Linde turned his head and looked at the approaching carriage in the distance. At this time, Lori also led the soldiers and rushed over, dragging 20 scattered demon corpses. Linde glanced at the corpses. These demons all died indirectly because of him, but Linde didn't feel the slightest sense of guilt. He didn't even feel the nausea that the protagonist felt when he killed someone for the first time in the novel. There was probably a little nausea, but Linde knew that it wasn't the first time he had killed someone indirectly. Let's make it a jingguan. Linde said to Lori. Jingguan. Just pile the corpses of these demons together. After hearing Linde's explanation, Lori looked at the nuns and refugees again and laughed. Okay. Leave it to me. I will definitely make these guys look beautiful. Following Lori, Darcy, who was fighting the demons for the first time, shuddered after hearing Linde's explanation. She thought to herself that Lord, this is too cruel. Is Lord such a terrifying and cruel person? But when Darcy walked to the front and saw the miserable situation of the nuns and refugees, Darcy almost vomited and thought about it. If her sister was tortured like this. Darcy shook her head and sighed that the Lord was still so kind. Chapter 53. Soon, the scene was taken over by Lena's knights, and martial law began throughout the camp. The holy water was also transported, along with Lila and several maids who were absolutely loyal to the Lars family. The level of martial law was so high that even Caroline could only follow Lori back to the territory first. After Linde and Isa discussed it, the holy water was poured into a large wooden barrel without any money. Lady Flora, you come first. Flora looked puzzled as bottle after bottle of liquid was poured into the big wooden barrel, and asked doubtfully, Little Isa, what is this? You'll know when you come in first. Seeing Isa's constant urging, Flora had no choice but to become a doctor and took off her tattered nun uniform. Linde also came to the outskirts of the camp in a very gentlemanly manner and squatted down with Lena as usual. On the ground, he began to review this battle. The cold touch quickly filled Flora's whole body, and her gorgeous red hair gradually spread out on the surface of the holy water. At first, Flora didn't realize that it was a whole bucket of holy water, because it was so contrary to common sense. Every drop of each bottle of precious holy water must be carefully preserved. How can holy water be counted by the bucket? Until a slight chill came from the sores and curses on her body. Flora, who was gradually recovering her consciousness from the soak, suddenly stood up and glared at Isa angrily. Where did this holy water come from? Flora tried her best to suppress her emotions, but her voice was still filled with anger. As soon as these words came out, other nuns and refugees all looked over. Holy water? Is the big bucket of holy water that Lady Flora soaked in? How is that possible? Flora's anger turned into tears. She held up the holy water that was constantly flowing out of her hands and asked Isa, do you know how many people can be saved by just this little holy water? Have you forgotten how I taught you? Isa, you can obviously save more people with so much holy water. Before Flora could continue speaking, another carriage suddenly pushed in outside the camp. Two maids skillfully carried down the wooden barrel filled with holy water and moved it next to Flora. Before she could finish speaking, Flora suddenly got stuck and stared dumbly at the two buckets of holy water beside her. That's right, Flora, who is no longer confused, can now clearly confirm that the two barrels poured into the barrels like river water are extremely precious holy water. It takes the most pious nuns and priests to pray for a month to get it. A bottle of holy water. Isa personally carried the nun and the refugee who were most severely affected by the plague and curse into the two wooden barrels. Thank you goddess, thank you goddess. Thank you goddess for the miracle. Feeling the continuous healing of the holy water, the nun prayed to the goddess excitedly. But Isa interrupted the nun and said, this is not a miracle sent by the goddess. These are produced by the grey-white collar lord. You should thank the grey-white collar, not the goddess. The scene immediately fell silent, and everyone suddenly stopped talking. Seeing that something was not right about the atmosphere at the scene, Flora immediately continued what Isa said, thank the goddess for sending the Lord to save us, thank the Lord, and praise the Lord. Everyone immediately followed Flora in praying, thank you goddess, thank you Lord. Looking at the nuns and refugees with relieved expressions, Isa realized how blasphemous what she had just said was. And he almost pitted Linde against the goddess, but fortunately Flora corrected him, which not only protected everyone's faith, but also thanked Linde. At the same time, Isa also shouted to everyone, these are not holy water, but the ancestral potions of the Lord. The Lord took them out to save everyone. These will be gone after they are used up. The nuns understood. Although the refugees didn't know what this sentence meant, they all nodded silently. Although they looked at the barrels of medicine that were constantly being shipped in, they didn't look like they would be gone after they were used up. It is impossible to recover just by soaking in it. To really remove the curse and plague from the body, long-term treatment is needed. The number of holy water or potions required for subsequent treatment is astronomical. There are so many potions handed down from the Lord's ancestors. But what the heck, at least that's what the Lord said. The final right of interpretation belongs to the grey and white collar officials. Linde plans to throw all the blame to the original owner's ancestors. After all, the original territory has been destroyed. Even if someone really wants to test the evidence, it can't be verified anymore. As the tightly wrapped maids came in and began to wipe the bodies of the nuns and refugees with holy water, the originally desperate nuns and refugees immediately rekindled their hope of living, and even started to become a little lively. At least there was no one there seeking death again. Just soaking in holy water cannot cure the disease, but it has greatly alleviated Flora's pain. Even though the ugly sores and curses are still on her body, Flora has begun to regain her former holy self. Female style. Looking at the holy water that was constantly being transported, Flora was still in indescribable shock. If her mind hadn't become clearer, Flora would have really suspected that the goddess was weaving a dream for her. Little Isa, is everything you said true? Was it really all produced by the Lord? Isa and Flora talked about the origin of the holy water, but said nothing about how to make it, and even put all of this on Lin's head. Yes, the Lord can make a bottle of holy water in 3 minutes. These holy waters are all made by the Lord. Ah? Are you sure that Lord is a man? Isn't he a saint chosen by God? He is simply a walking miracle. Flora even now had the urge to run out and confirm. This was so shocking. If the church found out, they would probably kidnap Linde back. Is it true that the Lord is not the illegitimate son of the goddess? Flora asked the exact same question as Isa at that time. Lady Flora, these words are so disrespectful to the goddess. Isa, who once had the same question, started to blame Flora. Sorry, goddess, but this is really... Flora turned around and saw that the maids had begun to teach the nuns and refugees about the rules of grey and white collars. Many people have begun to cry, thinking that the grey-white collar is the goddess's kingdom on earth, and Linde is the goddess's new representative. Some people were even discussing the rumor that it was the Lord who received the inspiration from the goddess and dug out the holy water spring. Oh no, it was the magic potion dug out from his hometown to save everyone. Although she was very shocked and confused by the endless supply of holy water from the grey-white collar, Flora was actually very clear-headed about the goddess of light, because Flora thought a lot along the way. Does Scarlet Saint Flora still believe in religion? Looking at the dim holy light in her hand, Flora said that she was still the devout saint, but she might not even believe it. But Flora did not give up this belief, and even spoke for the goddess of light before, because Flora realized that people still need faith. People who have just experienced the hell of despair need a stable and righteous faith to support them. Spirit. And the goddesses who have believed in them are the easiest to be accepted by these people. Unknowingly, refugees like Flora had divided the holy sea between the goddess and the goddess of light. It is okay to believe in the goddess, but not necessarily to believe in the goddess of light. If Linde showed up now and claimed that he had obtained the oracle from the goddess and wanted to become the new pope, it is estimated that this group of people would bow down and worship him. This is also Flora's ultimate answer to the questions she has been thinking about along the way. The goddess has abandoned the holy sea, which is now violating the oracle and gradually declining, and now she should follow the guidance of the goddess, not the holy sea. To put it bluntly, it is actually a question of the final interpretation authority of scriptures and oracles. Chapter 54. A few days later, after Isa and Flora checked and confirmed that all the nuns and refugees present were out of danger, Linde began to prepare for these people to settle down in grey collar. Of course, even soaking in holy water every day cannot cure the plague and curse. In fact, everyone still has ugly scars and some dead sores on their faces and bodies, but at least there is no disgusting liquid flowing out anymore. The highly contagious plague has been killed or purified by the holy water. As long as the remaining people pay attention to personal hygiene, there will basically be no cross-infection. At this point, this battle has come to a perfect end. Soldiers protected the nuns and refugees as they arrived at their prepared resettlement site next to the grey collar. All the soldiers had a look of pride on their faces, especially the soldiers led by Lori. Every one of them had their mouths tilted to the sky. In the past few days, everyone said that the demons were nothing more than that. They were easily defeated. We hold it in hand. But now, Linde asked these soldiers to walk at the front with a full set of equipment, which made the corners of these soldiers' mouths harder to suppress than the firecrackers in the laboratory. They were all walking in a goose step spiritedly, so majestic. There were several injured soldiers who were forced to follow the team even before their injuries were healed. Although there were no deaths in this battle, it was not that no one was injured. It was mainly caused by the charge of the war horses. A few unlucky guys were hit by the war horses head-on. Fortunately, the demons charged forcefully at that time. The frightened war horses had little speed left to pull up again, and they were still holding the recovery potion. Only then did he survive. The citizens were even more enthusiastic. The battle report clearly stated that the main force this time was the team in charge of Lori. Lars's knights were only responsible for preventing the other party from escaping. Even ordinary people could fight against the demons as long as they obeyed the command. Clan. Many people who usually participate in militia training are even more excited now, and even feel that no enemy is invincible. This is why Linde must let these ordinary soldiers fight as the main force. Unlike these soldiers who are usually completely off duty, only the militiamen who do daily drills are very demanding on morale. They must have a victory as a foundation. These militiamen will not collapse when they actually follow the soldiers to fight. However, the moment Jing Guan appeared, many people were still a little shocked. Because the opponent's number was relatively small this time, with only 20 heads, so he could only build a small tower. Lori simply put the small tower made of these heads into the net and hung it up like a flag. Even though it was sprinkled with lime, it was still very scary. Many parents directly cover their children's eyes. Just when some people didn't understand why the Lord was so cruel, the nuns and refugees finally followed the team. Although they had put on clean clothes, the messy hair, the unintentionally exposed scars on their face and arms, and the scabbed marks all told everyone how these nuns and refugees had been treated before. The crowd that was cheering just now even became somewhat silent, as if they were remembering the days when they lived on the frontier. Some people shouted a certain name loudly, and someone among the refugees who heard the name immediately responded and shouted loudly towards that person. They seemed to be two acquaintances who met at the Cathedral of Our Lady of Salvation. The atmosphere at the scene gradually became lively with these shouts. Yes, all of this has passed, and the Lord just casually defeated the demons who came to show off their power. People shouted loudly, and the demon heads hanging on the net no longer seemed so scary. There are even many people who are eager to join the army. The annihilation of 20 demons seems to be an ordinary achievement, but in the frontier, if any general or commander could take out the heads of 20 demons, the Lars family would definitely write it down and praise it, especially when the team is composed of basically ordinary people. Because it involves military exploits and the Lars family, plus the fact that they were defeated by the demons head-on, the battle report in the frontier is a bit like the late Ming dynasty in Linde's previous life. The battle report with double-digit kills can be considered a great victory. Many nuns and refugees looked at the buildings on both sides of the road in surprise. It was exactly what the maids said. They were all two-story buildings, and the streets were neat and clean, as if they were like heaven on earth. Linde and Reina received everyone at the end of the road. The soldiers saluted Linde excitedly, and Linde also responded with a military salute. This is a show, not only to give confidence to the people, but also to deepen the cohesion of everyone. Not only these new nuns and refugees, but also the savages who had just been persuaded to come down from the mountains. Now, no one no longer thinks that they are from any frontier territory, or that they are unrestrained free savages. Everyone is shouting long live the grey-collar workers. Amid the cheers of everyone, Linde handed a mask and a set of clothes to Flora, the leader of the refugees. It was a bird's beak mask, similar to the medieval epidemic doctors. Linde urgently contacted the Shuajin Merchant Alliance to order it. Different from the beak mask in the previous life, the beak mask here is filled with genuine chain gold materials, which can help the nuns heal the scars on their faces and help the nuns recover. This unique costume also helps the nuns in the territory. People distinguish these nuns from ordinary citizens. Because of Dai Ying's idea of a euro using it until death, Linde did not intend to give these church-educated ladies too much rest time. Other refugees can wait until they are free of infectious diseases before coming out to work, but these nuns cannot waste their time. The nuns who helped others on the northern border have long since become experienced doctors. However, because there is no church in the territory, the only way to see a doctor is to take a boat to Fasten Town downstream to find an unreliable traveling doctor. Now, these nuns can take on the work of the church in ordinary territories, including but not limited to treating diseases and rescuing people, taking care of children, handling some trivial matters, etc. Of course, the spread of faith must be restricted, at least the divine authority must be in the forest. Under the power of virtue. The most important thing is that the proportion of professionals among these nuns is not low, otherwise they would not be able to lead a group of refugees to resist on the border for so long. Flora is a 5th-level professional. Although she is biased towards the auxiliary type, it does not matter. The computing power is the same. Welcome to your new home, my lady. Linde personally put on the bird's beak mask for Flora. The mask perfectly covered Flora's face that was still gorgeous even though it had scars. At your service, my lord. Linde had already discussed the specific details with Flora before, and the grey-white collar had designated an area where houses had been built for these nuns and refugees who were suffering from diseases and curses to live. As for the original residents in this area, Linde gave them free materials for building new houses and a sum of money, commonly known as demolition fees. At least judging from the envious eyes of other residents, these demolition households are very satisfied. Although ordinary refugees cannot leave this quarantine area until the contagious plague is over, the nuns wearing beak masks can. The originally tightly wrapped nuns' uniforms, coupled with the beak masks and gloves, are basically complete. Isolation gowns, allowing the nuns to go out and do their work normally. Not only did the nuns have no objection, they were even very surprised. In their view, Linde's approach was not only not about exploiting them, but also reflected God's love for the world. Even if he was cursed, he would still dedicate his strength to everyone. This was not perfect. Is it in line with the teachings of the goddess? This can even be regarded as a kind of martyr's practice. In the hearts of many nuns, there is only one sun, and the Pope is not familiar with it. In the grey-collar future, nuns wearing masks have even become a feature of the territory and have been passed down. Chapter 55. After everything was arranged, Linde, Reina and Lori began the final review. The range of the grenade is still too close. If we encounter a regular demon army, we will probably suffer a loss. Lori handed a set of somewhat damaged chainmail breastplate to Linde. Linde waited, and sure enough, there were obvious scratches and damage on the breastplate. Those demons were still able to cause damage to soldiers with advanced equipment despite being at a disadvantage. Their physical fitness was indeed better than that of humans. No wonder the ERS family fought so hard against the demons. Unless all our soldiers are soldiers who have undergone formal training and will fight to the death, it will be difficult to wait for the opponent to throw grenades at close range. If they are militiamen who only participate in daily training, they are likely to be killed by the demons. When charging, I couldn't help but throw the grenade first. Although he won a big victory this time, Linde had to admit that luck was mostly involved. The opponent underestimated the enemy and gave the grey-collar workers many opportunities. Linde agreed with Lowry's point of view, nodded and said, I never planned to use hand grenades as the main weapon from the beginning. Do you remember the artillery in the laboratory? That should be the main force on the battlefield in the future. It would be better if the mobility issue could be solved. Lowry shrugged, but he just said casually. It can be said that Lowry is numb to the power of artillery. Unfortunately, there are still some small problems. It may be okay for defense, but it is a bit cumbersome to pull it out to fight. At the same time, the artillery at the test site also opened fire, and the dark shells flew into the pure white knights in a graceful arc. Of course, this is not really attacking Reina's knights. Linde wants to test how much damage the artillery in the current territory can cause to the elite soldiers of this world. The results of the test made Linde a little worried. Although according to the descriptions of the knights, if they were hit by a cannon head-on, even if they were fully prepared for defense, no one dared to say that they could completely withstand it. The details depended on the knight profession. Skill differences between them. But if it were the aftermath of the explosion, it would be difficult to affect the charge of these knights. It was very scary to see the explosive power of the artillery for the first time, but after these knights got used to it, they even dozed off in the explosion range. This is also one of the shortcomings of artillery. Random hits may be very effective against ordinary armies, but when encountering elite professionals, it is difficult to have obvious effects after the first kill. Although Lina told Linde that there are very few troops that can charge with artillery, and not everyone's army is composed of all professionals and equipped with luxurious equipment. As long as the artillery is pulled out, more than 80% of the troops can be attacked. The nobles fought until they could not find bay. However, Linde suffered from a phobia of insufficient firepower, and the current level of artillery was unable to provide Linde with a sense of security. The only thing that makes Linde happy is that the production and development of artillery are very fast. After all, Linde is not like other senior time travelers. When making a cannon, he has to chain steel first and find a way to increase the temperature of the furnace. Even if he does not use the arcane magic circle, he only uses the old methods of this world, relying on ordinary rune magic circles to power the furnace. Temperature provided by the big brick fly also allows Linde to use wrought iron for pouring directly. The main problem at present is that the yield rate is worrying, and there is still room for optimization in terms of weight, but it is more than enough for defense. In contrast, the research and development of firecrackers has been somewhat stuck. Even if Linde provided the basic ideas, there are already usable firecrackers, but the key to modern firearms lies in granulated smokeless gunpowder. Although Linde had seen the ancient video on how to granulate gunpowder, Linde was not very interested at the time, and the most important thing was smokeless gunpowder. Linde really didn't know how to do it. Of course, if he knew how to do it, the book is probably going to be banned. The gap between gunpowder rubbed by hand and modern gunpowder is still too big. Unlike artillery, fire blunderbuss cannot fly. If you can't figure out the gunpowder problem, you can only try and make mistakes slowly. Even the gunpowder problem has affected the development progress of the artillery, so that the current artillery is actually still very primitive. At least that's what Linde thinks. Bang! Reina test fired the rune craftsman. According to Linde's description, they used alchemy to pour out a fire blunderbuss. It was a bit like a percussion gun in the 19th century, skipping the step of a flintlock gun. However, it is not yet mass-produced. The bullet hit the chainmail armor. Judging from the straw behind the armor, the person who received this bullet probably felt uncomfortable, but it was not fatal. Lowry picked up the piece of chain armor that was shot by Reina and became a little silent. You must know that the chain armors currently in grey and white collars are all basically enchanted. Even the enchanted armor cannot completely block the damage of firearms. This is no longer an ordinary skill, but the level of magic props. Boss, are you going to rebel? Lowry sneaked up to Linde and confirmed with Linde half-jokingly. Not enough. Linde shook his head and said 3 simple words. Lowry didn't know what to say. Isn't this power enough? Could it be that his lord is really preparing to rebel? Lowry began a fierce struggle in his heart. Reina on the side continued to test fire a few rounds, then seemed to think of something, and began to dismantle the firearm and think about it. Linde signaled Lena's knight Susan to give him a target. Linde wanted to see how the firearm performed against the elite arms of this era. Susan was a little unhappy at first, but in the end she put on her helmet and stood not far away. Bang bang bang. Linde did not have the same shooting talent as Lena. After getting familiar with the feel for a long time, he fired the bullet into Susan's fully enchanted armor, but Susan had no reaction. In her own words, it was like being thrown a stone. Fire guns have actually surpassed the entire era, and are completely effective against chain armor and plate armor. However, it seems that the unique enchantment mechanism of this world has greatly reduced the power of the bullets. Originally, these enchantments were intended to prevent knights from being hit hard by armor-piercing weapons such as hammers and flails when fighting in close combat. Therefore, the enchantments were mainly specialized in eliminating impact force, but unexpectedly, something went wrong. The defense can withstand firearms that have not yet come out. The more advanced the enchantment, the less damage the firearm can cause. In this world where high-level knights are all tough dogs, ordinary kinetic weapons have limited effect on fully armed knights. It is difficult for firearms that have not reached the level of modern weapons to break through. The knights in the front row can be used as special attacks against the crispy mages. After all, Master's classic attack is very crispy, and defensive magic is mainly used to defend against magic. Gunpowder has no magic reaction, so it can easily escape the detection of the mages. If it sticks to the face, it might really be possible. The crispy master was taken away in one wave. But these are all what Reina said. The Lars family is most famous for being rich in knights. There are no magicians, and some even despise spellcasting professionals. If Lori on the side knew what Linde was thinking, he would definitely think that Linde was crazy. Elite professionals are not cabbage, how could they be broken through so easily? But it's too early to say this. After all, firearms nowadays are basically made using alchemy. The steps are complicated, time-consuming, and labor-intensive, and they can basically only be used as experimental products. Because the technological level in the territory can only be described as a sky loft. The normal research and development sequence should be to first complete the magic steam engine or magic capacitor, then the entire industrial lathe, and then develop weapons for mass production and manufacturing of weapons, but grey and white-collar workers do not yet have lathes. Although Linde has a sense of standardization, for example, chainmail can directly replace damaged parts, but there is really no way to deal with more delicate firearms. They can only rely on the hands of masters. Linde can only give them to masters. Tell me the size and let the masters do their best. Of course Linde knew that the lathe was the mother of industry, but Linde had only seen CNC machine tools, so he could only study the most primitive pedal lathe in his territory first. Why use a pedal? Because Linde has no clue about how to use the mathematical array as a stable power source, or which mathematical array to use as a power source. Linde was not originally an engineering major, so he was not interested in modifying the steam engine. To become a magic-driven engine, or to directly produce a magic engine in one step, you can only scratch your hair. Fortunately, Linde knew the principles. In the future, similar things may be made in the territory, but now there is a shortage of manpower, so Linde can only focus on weapons production. Reina on the side had already disassembled the firing gun at some point. Her green eyes turned around and asked Linde, "Brother, do you think you can use this device to fire magic?" Woolen cloth. Everyone present was silent, and Linde was instantly enlightened. Yes, he seemed to be bound by experience before, and whenever he encountered any difficulties, he tried to rely on his previous life experience to solve them. In contrast, Reina thinking outside the box is more like a time traveler. Yes. If you install a magic trigger on a fire gun and activate the arcane magic circle inside the fire gun, wouldn't it be a magic version of the fire gun? Lina, are you a genius? Ordinary fire guns and magic fire guns can even be used interchangeably. For tough dog knights, you can use magic directly. For mages who like to use magic shields, you can use ordinary fire guns directly. Ordinary fire guns can also be used with magic to suppress fire. Linde praised Reina unreservedly, causing Reina to scratch the back of her head in embarrassment. At the same time, she said awkwardly, "But brother, in this case, we need to simplify the mathematical array to the extreme. I am afraid it will be difficult for me to do this alone, and in this case, the launch angle and intensity of the spell will need to be readjusted. This is almost like inventing a new magic." Linde nodded and added, "Not only that, charging is also a problem. This is a weapon. It can no longer be adjusted while using it like those production lines. All in all, although this project has good prospects, it requires a lot of investment, especially from professionals who have seriously studied the magic system. Reina's knights are a bit hard to count on. After all, most of these knights, like Reina, use ancient magic to cast spells, casting all depends on feeling. Moreover, compared with Reina, there is less systematic learning. Most of them learn in battle. They are not familiar with spells other than night magic, and their computing power is worrying." Linde thought for a while, are there any professionals in the territory who can be recruited as coolies? It would be best if they were academic ones. Chapter 56. Soon, Flora and the nuns, who were wearing beak masks, received their first mission from the Lord. Many people are very excited and can finally contribute their part to the goddess's new messenger, the Great Lord. However, at the moment she received the mission, Flora grabbed the hand of the secretary who came to issue the mission and asked, "I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I want to confirm again that the mission issued by the Lord is true. Is it this? A bunch of math problems. To be precise, it revolves around the construction and related research of a second-level fire spell model. Yes, Lady Saint, don't underestimate these mathematical problems. These are all related to the future of the territory. These are the Lord's original words. The Lord said that they must be treated with care, and every number and coordinate must be at least checked. Just get it right twice." The clerk answered Flora's question very politely. Flora looked at the thick stack of math papers in her hand, wondering if she had not been saved at all, and that all this was just a hallucination before her death. Even through the mask, the secretary could still see Flora's doubts, and simply said, "The Lord said, if there is anything you don't understand, you can go to this place to find the Lord, and the Lord will help you." Answered. Flora, who really had no idea why she had to do math problems, took the test paper to the laboratory on the territory. After explaining her purpose to the knight at the door, she found Linde there. "Lord, Please forgive me for being rude. I just don't quite understand why our task is to do math problems, instead of treating diseases, saving people, or spreading your reputation. When Linde saw Flora's arrival, he was not in a hurry to answer the other party's questions. Instead, he introduced the magic trigger and the arcane magic circle to Flora, which made Flora a little scared. This is the biggest secret in the territory, but it was explained to Flora, who had just arrived in the territory for a few days. After all, he was someone who had a close relationship with the heroine, so Linde chose to trust her without reservation. After briefly explaining the principles of the mathematical circle and the magic trigger, Linde began to tell Flora about the laboratory. Actually, in the previous review, Reina and I both felt that our grey-collar workers won this battle mostly by luck. Although grenades with a range of only about 30 to 50 meters are very powerful, they are completely ineffective. Become the main weapon in the future. Linde touched the cannon in the laboratory as he spoke and continued, so we must continue to update our weapons, not only to enable our soldiers to fight against those demons who use blood magic, but also to fight against middle and low-level demons. Professionals can also fight. Flora's first reaction was that Linde was crazy. The skills Linde mentioned and the weapons he displayed were already crazy enough, but now he actually said that ordinary soldiers should be able to fight against middle and low-level professionals. Force? This is really awesome. Doesn't that mean that with these weapons, auxiliary professions like nuns can go on the battlefield? Flora's hands were trembling with excitement. She originally thought that as an auxiliary professional, she could only spend her whole life in the rear, and at most she could be a field doctor on the battlefield. She never thought that she would have the opportunity to kill demons with her own hands in the future. Linde came to a device that looked like an enlarged version of a firecracker. Lisha and Reina worked hard overnight and it was considered a prototype of a future weapon. After pulling the trigger under the weapon, the large firecracker connected to the magic stone in the magazine shot out a blazing ray, directly hitting the armor in the distance. You can clearly see black smoke coming out of the armor. This is a second-level fire magic, or a modified version of the second-level fire magic. It is a brand new magic. In fact, it changes the launch angle, launch force, and increases the stability of the molten ray. This power is not comparable to the blood magic of ordinary demons, but it is still unable to fire continuously because there is no way to deal with the problem of overheating of the barrel, and it is too big, and its size is faster than that of the previous generation in the late Qing dynasty, which required 2 people to operate. It's a big deal. But it is a prototype after all, and there is still a lot of room for improvement. As long as it can succeed, it can solve the problem of ordinary kinetic energy weapons being difficult to cause damage to fully armed knights. After a detailed discussion with Reina, Linde discovered that the reason why the knight's enchantment direction was mainly for impact was because there were not many spell-casting professionals on the actual battlefield. Except for the well-organized mage troops in the Anju kingdom in the south, the mainstream of the battlefield is melee combat between knights. Therefore, the enchantment of armor is generally based on eliminating impact. To put it simply, the mainstream of knights now is to pile up toughness and physical strength. Resistance, and does not deliberately pile up magic resistance. After all, most bloodline magic that is quite terrifying to ordinary people is just some small tricks, and it is difficult to cause effective harm to elite knights. In other words, as long as this weapon that can emit molten rays can be successfully developed, it can basically restrain all current mainstream enchantments. This is so crazy. Flora praised. This was the first time Flora felt that a murder weapon could be so full of beauty. Linde, who didn't know what Flora was thinking, added, so your task is to optimize the spell structure of the molten ray. I will send Lisha to connect with you and compress the arcane magic circle that converts the spell structure of the molten ray to the extreme. Linde patted the percussion gun on the table next to him. It should probably fit into a weapon of this size. This kind of low-level spell has a lot of room for optimization, but no one will specifically optimize this type of spell. In other words, the construction of spell models is quite free. In addition, everyone's spellcasting habits are different. Most of them spell models have not been studied to the extreme, and no one has proposed what a standard spell model should look like. Can it be done? In fact, Linde was not sure. After all, the arcana array currently used in the territory only has one that can run, and the bricks fly with great strength. There is no need for optimization. It's like all the projects were originally run on the 4090, and everyone didn't need to consider optimization issues at all, and even wanted to catch up to the max. However, you told me that the new project should run smoothly on the 1060, or even the 960. In addition, there was no developer with a professional background in the territory, so Linde's psychological expectations were actually very low. As long as it could be carried by a single soldier, Linde could accept it even if it was made into a mortar. Think carefully about the academic qualifications of today's grey-collar researchers. The leader, Lisha, is Zheng Yelazi. She has learned a lot from her father and the Talisman Saint Society, but she is not a professional and knows nothing about traditional magic. She is very partial to science. ISA, the most reliable among them all, has only completed 3 years of courses in the academy in the royal capital. Her basic skills may be the most solid, but she is essentially at the level of a fresh graduate, and she is currently unable to use magic, but you may be able to use the Great Meteor spell. Reina should have the strongest overall strength and the most active thinking, but she is very abstract. Every time she opens her mouth, she will say this and that. There are many arcane mathematical formations that only Reina can analyze and cannot teach to others. Linde's biggest role is probably because he stays with Lina every day, so he can probably understand some of Lina's thinking. He can occasionally translate what Lina wants to say and provide research ideas. Seriously studied magic. The rest are a group of frustrated rune craftsmen who were thrown away like rubbish by the royal capital and the Lars family. They are completely a grassroots team. It's worth trying. This is just a second-level magic. The spell model and theory are not complicated. Flora nodded. Compared with the grey-white collar research team, the nuns whose members all came from the Holy See are much more reliable. Then I can rest assured. If you need any materials you can contact me directly. Linde nodded slightly and was a little relieved that Flora didn't feel like she was about to rebel when she saw these weapons like Lori did. He didn't notice Flora's fanatical eyes under the mask. Flora really didn't want to rebel. How could it be called a rebellion when the goddess's great disciple returned to his rightful place? The beliefs of the old era can no longer reconcile the current contradictions. People now need a new belief. Perhaps even Flora herself did not notice that she was gradually becoming extreme after experiencing a series of things. Chapter 57. The destruction of the demon team that had been deep into the northern border did not attract anyone's attention, because this team was originally in a one-way communication state. At most, the liaison officer felt that Vulcan was having fun in the northern border. Although there are many rumors about the new beak-masked nuns in grey-white collars, only the town of Face and downstream knows some specific information. But in this era where communication mainly relies on shouting and contact basically relies on walking, everything in grey-collar workers seems to be smoke and mirrors. In contrast, the slightest disturbance in the royal capital will set off a new storm. For example, this morning, the kingdom's prime minister, Kotick, had already entered the residence of Grand Duke Lars. At that time, there were many students and nobles walking along the street to see off Kaedik, and there was even a feeling that the wind was rustling and the water was cold. Kotick didn't say what he was going for on his trip, he just said it was for peace. Many people speculated that Kotick went to negotiate with Archduke Lars about some matters in the north, and some were worried about what would happen to Archduke Lars. Treat the heroic prime minister who is now in the royal capital. These people are right to worry. The furious Archduke Lars can hardly control the magic power surging around him, but Kotick sitting on the other side of the negotiation table is drinking tea calmly. Your Excellency, have you thought about it? If you don't sign, I don't know what will happen to your precious granddaughter. Behind Kotick was a little girl being guarded by 2 guards from the Prime Minister's palace. This was Rena's youngest sister, Ruby Lars. Lina has 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. After Lina's father disappeared, Grand Duke Lars originally planned to let Sean, the best of the 4 siblings, succeed his father's position through a succession war. A younger brother and younger sister were also assigned to enhance the power of Sean's lineage. Under such circumstances, Ruby was assigned a territory that belonged to her, but it was usually managed by her brother Sean Lars. But now, Ruby appeared in the royal capital, still in the hands of political enemy Cow Dick. Grand Duke Lars felt that his head was about to explode. Ruby could appear here, but he didn't know anything. Not only did it mean that there was a problem with Ruby's territory, but even Sean's territory might be in danger. Kaldic, I thought you knew the rules among nobles. Although Archduke Lars's words were not offensive at all, his body looked like a giant bear that had already made an attack posture. This rule is naturally an unwritten rule among aristocrats. No matter how ferocious the fight is, it will not harm the family. This is why Grand Duke Lars is confident that he can seal Ruby out. Is this rule written in the kingdom's laws? Why don't I know? I only know that Ruby Lars preyed on the people, aroused public anger, and was driven out of the territory by the mob. Her life or death is uncertain. She is just a child, and she doesn't even have many citizens in her territory. She doesn't even collect taxes. Archduke Lars slapped the table furiously, causing the table under his palm to shatter instantly. Do you think the people in the capital now believe you, the incompetent Grand Duke, or me, the heroic Prime Minister? Kotick said proudly, I have brought long-lasting peace to your northern territory. Then, Kotick glanced at the document that was shattered along with the table on the ground, took out another one from his arms, and continued, sign it, Your Excellency. His Majesty said that as long as you sign it, it will be allowed. When Your Excellency the Grand Duke leaves the royal capital, don't you want to go wherever you want with your granddaughter? This was obviously a combination of hard and soft tactics. Archduke Lars glanced at the butler, who tremblingly took the treaty over, but at this moment, Kotick took out another document from his arms. Handed it to the butler together and said, Your Excellency, don't worry, I have another copy here, but don't worry, it's not a treaty. You just need to read it out in the Queen's Square according to the words on it. Of course, you can only read it. Only then can you be reunited with your beloved granddaughter. Grand Duke Lars took the document. As expected, this document was as outrageous as the treaty. To use an analogy, the document that needed to be read out was a self-indictment. It was densely packed with information about what Grand Duke Lars had done or things I haven't done before. But most of it was done by Kotick himself, but these things were cleverly grafted onto the Lars family. Seeing that Grand Duke Lars was about to get angry, Kotick gently raised his hand, and the guard behind him immediately drew out his sword and put it on Ruby's neck. Grandfather. Ruby, who was under 10 years old, hugged her most beloved bear doll and looked at Grand Duke Lars with tears in her eyes. The next day, almost all the nobles and bards arrived at Queen's Square on time. Grand Duke Lars lost his former majesty and looked as decadent as an old man. He stood on the high platform that had been set up and began to read. Content on the file. In order to quickly find out what happened in the north, Grand Duke Lars can no longer fight with these conspirators in the royal city. Grand Duke Lars has a hunch that something big must have happened to the Lars family in the north. But Kotick didn't know what means were used to block the news in all aspects. I am a sinner. I betrayed His Majesty's trust in me. It was my willful actions that caused the Northern Territory to become what it is today. Grand Duke Lars looked like a giant bear in his twilight years, reading sadly on the stage from the script set by Kotick. As more and more crimes that did not belong to the Lars family came out from the mouth of Grand Duke Lars, more and more people began to rush to report, and many passers-by even directly threw their weapons at the old man. Rotten eggs. There were more and more people in the audience, and some even shouted, "Hang him! Hang him! Make amends to us!" Of course, there were also many onlookers who did not know the truth and asked, "Who is this old man?" "That's the grandpa who is a disgrace to the nobility." "Oh, you are so shameless. The upper beam is not straight and the lower beam is crooked. No wonder you can teach that aristocratic shame." This self-incriminating edict quickly alerted the guards of the royal city. The guards immediately took control of the scene and quickly captured the northerners who argued for Archduke Lars. Immediately some bards in the crowd began to claim that it was Prime Minister Kotick who made Grand Duke Lars wake up. Long life Prime Minister Kotick. Immediately afterwards, as if they had planned it, the people present began to praise Kotick's great achievements, and threw countless rotten eggs at Archduke Lars as if they had been prepared. Grand Duke Lars, who was slapped in the face, could only wipe the egg liquid from his face, and continued to read the contents of the document given to him by Kotick in the autumn wind. For a time, the entire royal capital was insulting and criticizing Grand Duke Lars, as well as praising Kotick. The bards kept praising Kotick's wisdom and bravery, but in fact, Kotick didn't have much wisdom. He just had no lower limit for what he did. Chapter 58. Kotick rarely kept his promise. After Grand Duke Lars read out his crime, the palace immediately signed the order, and the Grand Duke of the North, who had been trapped in the capital for many years, could finally return to his territory. Theoretically, if Grand Duke Lars wanted to leave, no one could stop him, but out of loyalty to the royal family, Grand Duke Lars had stayed in the royal capital obediently. The elderly Grand Duke Lars was keenly aware of the change in the king's attitude towards the north, but as a veteran knight family, Grand Duke Lars still followed the old king's orders. This was a kind of foolish loyalty based on the spirit of chivalry, and it was also he lowered his stance and wanted to tell the old king that the north was not the enemy. At least that's what Archduke Lars thought. But now, no matter how rigid and loyal Grand Duke Lars is, he can realize that Augustine no longer regards Lars as his vassal, but as an enemy. Being able to do something like using the other party's children as a threat has exceeded the bottom line of aristocratic politics in this era. Maybe you would say that real politics is more unscrupulous than this. At least in this era, nobles still have to face shame, especially in wars between nobles. Even if the fight is bloody, except for the mortal enemies, basically only need to pay the ransom. Those things that have no bottom line can be done, but you can't do it so shamelessly. Grand Duke Lars hugged Ruby and took one last look at the royal capital in the carriage. It was still as old, smelly, dirty, and messy, but it was still so full of life. "Master, it's time to set off," the old butler who was driving in front warned. "Well, let's set off and go to our base, Winter Castle. Why don't you go to Master Sean's River Valley first?" The butler has been with the Lars family for decades, and his relationship with Grand Duke Lars is more like a friend than a master and servant. Naturally, he also knows Lars's love for his grandchildren. Now even Ruby can be easily caught by the royal family. Then Sean should be more dangerous now. It's too late. Archduke Lars sighed, "No matter what happens to Sean or not, we must go to Winter Castle first. Only when we get there can we truly control the situation." According to what Ruby said, the king was captured because of the internal rebellion in the territory. Some knights of the Lars family rebelled. Archduke Lars could tell with his toes that it was his careless few who the son has already joined forces with the royal family to take action. It's just that Grand Duke Lars didn't expect that his sons would become so courageous, and they would also start to learn from the royal family and create conspiracies. However, as long as he returns to Winter Castle, these bastards will not cause any trouble in the eyes of Archduke Lars. As long as he is alive, the knights of the Lars family will know who they should be loyal to. Let's go back to the north. In this way, the ruler of the north left the royal capital on a bone-chilling morning. Even Archduke Lars did not dare to make any announcement. He only brought a team of guards with him, and even the family emblem of the North Wind Bear was secretly erased. Because once you have the family emblem of the North Wind Bear tattooed on you, some people along the way will throw rotten eggs or fresh feces on the roadside. At the same time, in the royal capital, the king's castle, China, Augustine III, who was lying on the hospital bed, held a piece of intelligence in his hand and asked Kotick, "Has everything been arranged?" "It's been arranged. Don't worry, Your Majesty. This plan will be assisted by demons. It's absolutely foolproof and will definitely make Grand Duke Lars die without a burial place." "That's good, cough. Don't leave any future troubles. Lars's brats must also be dealt with, as well as the uncles of those brats. After they get rid of those brats, they will give them to someone who can lead them. The location of the northern border makes them fight among themselves. If we find another opportunity, we will get rid of them all at once." Cough cough cough. Augustine III coughed violently, but continued to talk about his thoughts. It is difficult to completely kill a family like Lars that has ruled a place for hundreds of years. In addition to physical elimination, their influence must also be eliminated. And differentiation is the best way. Support a force that relies on you, instigate, plot, and fan the flames. When this force grows stronger, you can continue to use this combination of punches. At that time, all you have to do is admit to the Lars bastards that everyone is the orthodox member of the Lars family and everyone has the right to claim the Northern Territory, and then those bastards will give each other their brains. With the fight out, coupled with the demons from outside the country who are watching eagerly, the destruction of the northern territory does not require the royal family to take action at all. Moreover, the Lars family will fall into a state of fragmentation, and there will no longer be the possibility of unifying the north. After thinking about it, Augustine III suddenly discovered something was wrong. It wasn't that there was something wrong with my own thinking, but that the surrounding environment suddenly began to blur. Where's the maid? Where's the attendant? I've been coughing for so long, but no servant came in to deliver water? Unknowingly, only Augustine III and Kaldek were left in the room. In a daze, Augustine saw a cold smile on the corner of Kaldek's mouth. At the same time, his eyelids became heavier and heavier, as if he was about to be invaded by a nightmare. Augustine III wanted to call the guards and activate the magic device on his body, but found that he could only utter 2 syllables. Your Majesty, it's time for you to rest. As Kaldek finished speaking, Augustine III closed his eyes. Has everything been arranged? A seductive woman wearing a slit nun's uniform walked out of the void behind Kaldek, holding a lantern. It went very smoothly. He didn't even know he was in a dream at the beginning. Kaldek no longer had the demeanor of a heroic prime minister in front of this woman, nor the groveling in front of Augustine. Instead, there was only deep fear and obedience. As soon as the magic props on Augustine III reacted, they were immediately suppressed by the black energy emitted by the lantern in the hand of the seductive woman. You did a great job. To be honest, we didn't expect something like you, with no limits, to be able to do this. The charming woman's words were thorny, and she seemed to be very dissatisfied with Kaldek's cruel methods. We do want to stimulate conflicts, but we don't want them to get out of control. You've done a great job. Some conflicts are beyond the control of our lantern dream. Do you understand? Kaldek stayed in place tremblingly, not daring to refute. Next, you need to keep a low profile and don't do such risky things again. If you bring the demons into the situation, the bishop doesn't like it very much. Before Kaldek could react, everything just seemed to end abruptly like a dream. Your Majesty? Your Majesty? The maids in attendance suddenly appeared and kept shouting in front of Augustine III's bed. The sweaty Kaldek was surrounded by the equally sweaty imperial doctor and the best professor at the Royal Capital Academy. On the day when Archduke Lars left the royal capital, Augustine III, who had ruled the Cape Tien Kingdom for decades, lost consciousness. However, according to outside information, Augustine III died peacefully in his sleep due to overwork. Because the crown prince had been appointed long ago, Crane Augustine stepped forward to stabilize the situation as soon as possible and prepared to ascend the throne. But because the old king's death was too sudden, the royal capital still fell into chaos. Moreover, among the rumors among the nobles, the death of Augustine III was full of doubts. Some people even claimed that Augustine III was still alive and breathing normally, but his consciousness seemed to have sunk into the ocean and slept forever. Chapter 59. Countless fire lights shot into the sky, turning the night sky into red. Several crossbow arrows with hooks were fired at the fleeing carriage, but they were all blocked by invisible forces. It's really difficult. Several nobles on the hillside in the distance were using eagle eye skills to observe everything happening on the road. Don't worry, the opponent is the ruler of the north after all, and some of his trump cards are normal. But if it continues like this, it will be daybreak. This is too powerful. They have been running away for almost a whole night. The demon on the side opened his pocket watch and retorted, 4 hours to be precise. 4 hours. 4 whole hours. The noble at the beginning said anxiously, do you know what will happen if old Lars returns to his winter castle? He will immediately know that his favorite grandson has been attacked by us and will find us. Not only are we cooperating with the royal family, we are even working together with you. Actually, Archduke Lars already knows about it now. The demon looked at the elite demon cavalry following the human cavalry in the distance. And you, a human being, are quite self-aware. Attacking your own nephew and then your own father is indeed enough to be called a snake. But our demons are different. We demons are much nobler than you, so don't use snakes. A nest of rats describes us. Snort. The noble snorted coldly and continued, if you let him escape, you might be fine, but I'm going to die. The demon still said unhurriedly, that's right, and it's a place where there is no burial. Once Grand Duke Lars returns to his station, with his huge prestige, he can immediately take over the territory of his nephew. You have returned to your original form. Now we can only launch an attack at the same time and wipe out your father and your nephews and nieces, so as to ensure that you are the only remaining successors of the Lars family. You know you won't send any more people. I told you there is no need to worry. You also know that your Lars family is rich in knight professionals. They are as hard as turtles and cannot be easily chewed. Isn't it just with this in mind that we chose Are You Waiting Here? The demons looked at the carriage guarded by a group of knights, sighing that humans are really rich. In the past 4 hours, there have been no less than 10 mithril level magic items used on the carriage, including orichalcum level magic items. It was thrown out as if it was for free. Even though a long interception army had been deployed and countless traps and magic props were prepared, the carriage still escaped to this place. The opponent even used a crystal level magic item to silence the magic in an entire area. The opponent almost escaped that time. Fortunately, the other party did not have space-based magic props, and the shadow system was not what the Lars family was good at. Otherwise, the people on the hillside would not have been so bold to intercept and kill a prince of the kingdom. Grand Duke Lars on the carriage was breathing heavily. The best way now was to hold Ruby on the best horse and lead an elite team to attack. But that would mean abandoning the carriage's defensive magic and most of its magic items. Archduke Lars had already tried it once when using crystal-level magic items before, and sent out a team of elite knights to try to break through. However, the opponent's preparations were too complete, and even the most elite knight team would have difficulty breaking through the siege. The opponent was coming with great force, and Archduke Lars really had no confidence that he could lead Ruby out of the encirclement. After all, the opponent had also used crystal-level magic items, and most importantly, it seemed that the opponent had no intention of leaving alive. Seeing the kingdom's magic legion and the green-skinned demons mixed together, Grand Duke Lars, even as neurotic as Rena, could understand what was going on. What disappointed Archduke Lars the most was that he saw many knights using the Lars battle formation in the melee. Sean's territory had most likely been lost. Although he was mentally prepared, it was at this moment that Archduke Lars truly became decadent and became an ordinary old man in his 70s. How far is it from Winterhold? Grand Duke Lars held on to his knightly stance to resist Lu Yue, and at the same time asked the butler who was driving the carriage. Of course, this question is actually meaningless. Archduke Lars was attacked just after he walked out of the Guilin fortress that divides the central zone and the northern border. Even if he rode at full speed all night, he would not be able to reach Winter Castle. Asking this question was more because Archduke Lars wanted to give up. I'm afraid it's too late, my lord. The sound of heavy breathing could be clearly heard even under the sky full of crossbow arrows and magic. Looking at Ruby shivering in the carriage, Grand Duke Lars seemed to have made some determination. Grandpa, am I going to be taken away again? Ruby hugged her stuffed bear tightly and huddled in the corner of the huge carriage. You have to listen to the housekeeper when you go out later, you know. Grand Duke Lars caressed his youngest granddaughter. 4 hours of fierce fighting had made Archduke Lars extremely exhausted, his hair was disheveled, and his entire figure had shrunk. At this time, Grand Duke Lars was no longer the all-powerful northern lord, but more like an old man in his twilight years. The twilight old man picked up his little granddaughter and hid it in his robe. Then he calmly walked to the carriage and climbed onto the other horse pulling the carriage. Sabas, how many years have we known each other? It seems to be 50 years, my lord, or 52 years, I can't remember clearly. During the conversation, the robe was waved, and Ruby appeared in the old butler's arms at some point, while only a bear doll was left under Grand Duke Lars' robe. It's time for me to teach my traitors a lesson. You take Ruby and go west to seek refuge with those elves. Do you understand? Decades of tacit understanding immediately made the old housekeeper understand what the Grand Duke was thinking, and he nodded silently. The two immediately cut off the lasso of the carriage with a tacit understanding, clamped their legs together, and waved the reins, squeezing out the last bit of strength from the horse under their legs. Lars soldiers, charge with me. Following this roar, the surrounding knights whose armor had changed from pure white to charred black immediately raised their weapons and shouted, for the north. The enchantment system on the weapons and armor began to operate to the limit, and the light for a while was even blinding. At this time, the old housekeeper took out a piece of cloth as thin as cicada's wings and put it on himself. The Lars family is indeed not good at shadow magic, but they still have some shadow magic props. However, this breathless cloth does not have any magical effect of making people disappear in place, but can only reduce the breath and eliminate the existence. Since, if it is used by someone who has been targeted, it will have no effect. But now, Grand Duke Lars carried a bear doll in his arms and led the knights in a desperate charge. No one noticed that an old butler and the real Ruby disappeared quietly into the knights. The old guy started to break out. Just as we expected, he started to break out in the direction of Winter Castle. The nobles on the hillside clapped their hands excitedly. In this case, there is only a glimmer of hope within the confines of Winter Castle, so it is normal to use all your strength to break out in the direction of Winter Castle. Once you break out of the encirclement and contact Winter Castle, then the polarity is reversed. This encirclement and suppression campaign was also designed along this line of thinking. But no one would have thought that Grand Duke Lars would ask Ruby to escape to the west. In order to allow Ruby to escape, Grand Duke Lars even left some important magic props to the old butler, so that in fact the first breakout was not an all-out breakout at all. This is an acknowledgement that the entire northern territory has fallen, and that their own breakout will fail. Everything must be considered in the worst-case scenario. This is the last lesson Grand Duke Lars taught his traitors. Chapter 60. Call out. A firearm that only had a frame and looked like a bear skeleton successfully fired a molten ray. Although the power is still far behind the spells cast by real second-level professionals, this is indeed a second-level magic. Linde picked up this weapon that currently only had a shelf. To be honest, the final shape of this magic weapon was closer to a short submachine gun than a rifle. After disassembling the barrel of the gun, Linde looked at the multiple magic circles carved with metal rings inside the barrel and was amazed. People with a professional background are more reliable than those from a grassroots level. The nuns not only simplified the magic structure of the molten ray to the extreme, but even used multiple rune arrays to optimize the structure. To put it simply, the structure of the molten ray is split into many magic arrays. A complete magic must not only have the structure of the spell itself, but also set the spell's intensity, launch angle, launch force, etc. However, the nuns only retained the structure of the molten ray itself, and the various subsequent parameters were directly replaced. Open a few magic circles to set up. Splitting a spell structure into several magic arrays is purely unnecessary and negative optimization according to normal thinking, but when used on weapons that do not require professional stimulation, it is not only dividing a large magic array into several small magic arrays, but also compressing it. If you have more space, you can even adjust the parameters of the weapon in your hand if necessary in the future. This is not so much a gun barrel as a fully automatic staff in the shape of a gun barrel. It is precisely because the firing angle is set using the magic circle, so there is no need for rifling. If it is not to make room for the cooling system, Linde suspected that this thing could even be tied directly to the hand and used as a sleeve arrow. The materials for these multiple arrays are just some alchemy materials imported from Faison Town and Chuajin Chamber of Commerce, and even these materials may still have room for optimization. Lori looked at the finished ray gun like a great magician who had lived for more than 30 years and was still single and met a succubus. He touched the gun body again and again, wiped it again, and kept aiming again and again. He put his hand on the trigger, then put the gun down, and then showed a lewd giggle, wishing he could take it with him when he eats, sleeps, and goes to the toilet. Flora and the nuns, the main creators of the gun on the side, were firing at a target in the distance. Although they claimed to test the gun, and only after trying it would they know where to improve, the firepower emitted from the mask gradually covered it. The laughter made Linde even feel a little creepy. Were they like this before? Linde asked Isa beside him. No, isn't it? I have been away from the Cathedral of Our Lady of Salvation for so long that I may not remember it clearly. Isa looked at the nuns whose smiles were gradually covered with fire, and wiped the sweat from her forehead, a little suspicious that she had rescued a group of fake nuns. As for the charging problem, as long as the production of magic stones can keep up, it is not a problem, but the charging efficiency still needs to be optimized, not only the charging efficiency, but also the charging ratio. It is necessary to maximize the use of a small piece of magic stone. The stone can be filled with magic power several times. Linde plans to equip every soldier with a gun with a tactical backpack, which can not only charge the ray gun, but also put some other things into the tactical backpack. If the charging efficiency is too low and the charging device is too heavy, it is likely that each gun will be equipped with a dedicated logistics soldier to carry the charging device. After testing the gun, Linde looked at Reina, who was in a daze in the distance, walked up and patted her on the shoulder. Reina, who was unaware of it, was immediately startled. When she turned around and saw a familiar face, she gradually felt relieved. You scared me to death, brother. How come you don't make any sound when you walk? Could a 6th level knight professional not notice Linde's half-hearted approach? Reina herself probably wouldn't believe it either. Are you okay? Reina has been like this for several days, and Linde is really worried. Similarly, the supplies that the Lars family was supposed to transport to Grey and White Collar have been several days late, and the Lars family's ship has still not been seen on the dock until now. This is the first time that Linde has encountered such a thing as the Lars family's ship breaking the promise. Those old-fashioned knights actually broke the promise? Even Reina realized that something was wrong. Coupled with some recent rumors, Linde had trouble sleeping and eating every day. Only by listening to Linde's report on grey collar workers every day could she fall asleep with a little peace of mind, although this was the case most of the time before. Of course it's okay. What can I do? Did you want to get a backpack or design a weapon for close combat? I've designed it for you. After saying that, Reina put on her usual smiling face and started rummaging around on her body. Strange, I clearly remember putting it in this pocket. Although Reina puts on a smile in front of Linde every day, Linde, who is with Reina every day, knows that it is somewhat forced to smile. Ah, I found it, brother, look. Reina finally pulled out a large design drawing from her breastplate, but the design drawing was empty. How could it be? I remember that I had clearly drawn it properly. The dumbfounded Reina looked at the blank design and felt more and more depressed for some reason, and even the corners of her eyes were slightly moist. Get a good rest. If that doesn't work, you can go hunting and relax as before. If there are any problems, I will inform you as soon as possible. Linde stroked Reina's blonde hair with some distress. Due to some news brought by the merchants, Reina had become a lot more haggard recently. But Linde felt that it was not just because of this. Reina was actually very smart. She might have realized something very early, but the recent rumors confirmed her suspicions. It was just because Reina was not very good at expressing and organizing, so even she herself didn't know why she was depressed. Sorry brother, I just... Reina stopped before she finished speaking. It was obvious that Reina hadn't sorted out her feelings yet and didn't know how to express them. I've asked Lila to send people to collect information. We should have news soon. If that doesn't work, let's go directly to Winter Castle to have a look, okay? Linde's words gave Reina reassurance. Finally, Reina returned to her usual self and said, well, brother, I believe you. Something happened to the Lars family, and Linde was almost certain of this. After all, the rumors can be heard even in the western part of the Northern Territory. But the extent of the incident still needs to be investigated and reported again. Linde also finally realized the shortcomings of the territory. The intelligence system was a bit weak. After all, before, he was only responsible for his own development and basically passively received intelligence. This was actually very dangerous. Today's information is basically passed on by businessmen and bards. Businessmen are okay, they are all people who do things for money, but Linde really doesn't like those bards who talk about epic legends. Back then, when he asked the heroine for information from Faison Town, the exaggerated descriptions of the bards were still fresh in Linde's memory. Chapter 61. At the same time, the head of the Champagne nobles, Weskier Evans, had just received the envoys from the royal capital and held a family meeting excitedly. Everyone, the opportunity for our Evans family to turn around has come. Now, the evil Lars family has been eliminated by the awakened Doug Lars, reinforcements from the royal capital, and friends on the border. Now, we only need to eliminate the last old man hiding in the west. Lars, we can completely end the Lars family's rule in the north and usher in a new era. Everyone here clapped excitedly. Many people had known about this for a long time, but they didn't feel relieved until Weskier confirmed it. The Lars family has been working hard in the north for too long. If they don't wipe out all the Lars at once, they will inevitably usher in a terrifying counterattack. And now, the branches of the Lars family have completely turned to the royal family. Relying on the power of the royal family and the demons, they have occupied a large territory including the river valley, and ambushed those who wanted to return to the north on the road. Grand Duke Lars of the Border. It can be said that as long as the last nail in the Lars family's presence in the north is removed, the Lars family, which has ruled the north since the founding of the kingdom, will be nothing more than Augustine's dog from now on. Of course, the methods used by Doug Lars were not honorable. Not to mention the relevant provisions of the air war set by Grand Duke Lars, the noble wars of this era also followed very outrageous and primitive etiquette, such as before the war. A formal declaration of war must be submitted, a time and place should be agreed upon, and everyone should shout 3, 2, 1 before the war begins. Even if this rule is stupid and shouldn't be followed, he shouldn't rely on being a member of the Lars family to use diplomatic negotiations as an excuse to let his 2 eldest nephews leave the city and then send troops to steal their homes. Moreover, they united with foreigners to fight against their own people, which was a bit too shameless. But no one cared about these details, because Doug Lars and his brothers won, even though they lured the 2 eldest nephews out of the city to fight again, so they let the 2 eldest nephews run away, and the little niece who ambushed them halfway also gone, but at least Archduke Lars is dead. Although the winter fortress where Archduke Lars is stationed cannot be captured for a while, as long as the supplies are cut off, the old men in the fortress can only wait to die or leave the city to surrender. Now as long as the grey white collar where Lino Lars is located is overturned, a new era will come. As the head of the Champagne nobles, Weskier has actually already secretly placed a bet on Doug Lars, or in other words, on the royal family behind Doug Lars to win. Obviously, when it comes to reaping the rewards now arrive. A newly developed small viscounty can be said to be at the mercy of the Evans family. As long as this battle is won, the Champagne nobles will no longer refer to a group of nobles, but only to Egypt. From now on, the Evans family will no longer be a noble family that can only live in the west of the north, but a truly first-class family. Although the main force cannot come to the west because they have to suppress the newly occupied territory, this is the meaning of the existence of the Evans family, not to mention the other allies who came to support this time. Although Weskier preferred that they not come, when these people saw that the war was decided, they immediately came over and said that they would exterminate the remnants of the old Lars family together. They were obviously here to share the cake. This made Weskier, who had already placed his bet, very unhappy. However, for the Evans family, which has already reserved the largest piece of cake, this is also a way to balance the western part of the north in the future. If everyone eats the same corpse, they will all be their own people from now on. Everyone, let us solemnly welcome the bard who contributed to this alliance, and is also my personal confidant, the bard of the epic compilation school, Lucanus. Amid the cheers of the crowd, a blindfolded bard wearing bright and exaggerated costumes entered the stage. Everyone has long been accustomed to this costume. Just as Lucanus was about to salute, Weskier helped him up. My lord, this is impossible. After speaking, Lucanus bowed stubbornly. Why can't I do it? You are the noble person who showed me the direction. If it weren't for you, I would still be sitting in my room counting money. Everyone laughed after hearing this. For those who don't know Lucanus, Weskier said, we are where we are today thanks to Mr. Lucanus's lobbying. Our family was able to seize the opportunity and become the leading company in the north. If our family still bets on both ends like Jefferson, we would still be just a little nobleman who only counts money at home. Lucanus said modestly, I just guided you to the right destiny. After all, we are the bards of the compilation section. The difference between the bards of our school of epic compilation and the record school is that we are not only responsible for recording history, but we are also responsible for our own consequences and create a glorious and magnificent epic. Now, Lord Earl, you are the protagonist of my epic. Before the smug Weskier could be humble, Lucanus continued to introduce enthusiastically, it is not enough to wait for new heroes to create epics. The real bards should create epics themselves and create myth. I believe that under the leadership of the Evans family, mankind will regain the glory of the Roman Empire. Roma was the last human empire. It has a history of thousands of years and is also the legendary golden age of mankind. The kingdoms of Capet and Anjou were both split from the Roma Empire, and both claim to be the Orthodox Roma Empire. Of course, to people today, this empire is just a legend. This was somewhat disrespectful, after all, it was still the era of Augustine, but no one present cared about this, and stood up to applaud Lucanus, and even opened champagne, in the physical sense. As soon as the coalition forces arrive and eliminate the last Lars, I will present you with my carefully compiled epic story. By then, you will be the hero who saves the north. Lucanus took out his lute and sang for the people present. In this atmosphere where the guests and hosts were enjoying themselves, a discordant voice came over. Father. Doug Lars not only violated the faith and rules of the nobles, but also suppressed local businessmen and exploited his own people. Just to please the demons, he even killed his biological father. We really want to fight with such a are you in company? Weskier stopped opening the champagne and found that it was his little son Jim who had a bad temper. Although most families love their youngest sons very much, Weskier became more and more dissatisfied with his son, so he was given a lot of hard work to run around. Unexpectedly, the more places this child ran around, the stronger his temper would become. I like to go against my family. And based on what I saw last time I went to grey and white collar, their subjects are very united and their lord is deeply loved. I'm afraid it won't be that easy to attack. Weskier hated the iron and scolded, if you are a good person and you can't eat it, what can a bunch of mud-legged people do? You might as well say that the remaining 50 cavalrymen of the grey-white collar are here. Come on, drag Jim down, reflect behind closed doors. Father. Before Jim could say anything else, the guard on the side immediately dragged Jim back to his room. Okay, guests, I'm sorry that Chuanzi is not in his right mind. Let's continue popping the champagne. I will pay for today's expenses. Of course, Weskier felt that there was some truth in what Jim said. As the future ruler of the western part of the north, he was about to be promoted to a great noble of a first-class family. Weskier felt that he could not win as well as Doug Lars. Ugly. Although it is not like the traditional nobles have to agree on a time and everyone shouts 321 to start the war letter still has to be issued first and the envoy has to be sent. After all, it was already a guaranteed win. Weskier wanted to win more decently, and it would be best if he could win without a fight. Winning without a fight would also deprive the allies who were preparing to attack Lars together. The biggest piece of cake. However, Weskier still had to discuss this matter with Lucanus. After asking, Lucanus expressed his support very clearly. Surrendering the opponent without a fight will add even more luster to your epic. After hearing this answer, Weskier touched his beard and could even imagine the scene of the once arrogant Lars surrendering to him. Chapter 62. Jefferson has been a little irritable lately, too. Jefferson, a Champagne aristocrat, naturally received the invitation to join forces to defeat the Lars family, and as a grey-collar neighbor, Jefferson was placed in a very important position. But to be honest, Jefferson was a little reluctant, because the most direct beneficiary of the development of grey-collar workers was the downstream town of Faison. If such a stable development continues, Jefferson will sooner or later surpass Weskier and become the talker of the Champagne nobles. Once grey-collar workers are destroyed, the best outcome is that the interests will be divided among everyone, and the worst outcome is that the Evans family will monopolize it. Not to mention that as a Champagne aristocrat, Jefferson might only be able to carry Weskier's shoes. No wonder the guy wasn't very interested in grey-collar business before, so he only sent his youngest son, whom he disliked the most. However, now there is a good opportunity for Jefferson to make a contribution. During every routine collection of taxes from merchant ships heading to grey-collar, Jefferson accidentally discovered Ruby and the old butler Sebastian hiding in the cabin. Although they had put on makeup, the two looked like the grandfather and granddaughter of ordinary people, but Ruby's acting skills were still a bit inferior. Jefferson, who had met once when they went out to do business, still recognized the two people. It is obvious that these two people are going to the grey collar where Reina is. According to the current position of the alliance and Jefferson, they should be detained immediately to claim credit. But at this moment, Jefferson hesitated. As a well-known fence-sitter, Jefferson didn't like to do risky things. Although everyone thought that the grey collar workers could be wiped out with a snap, the old butler's hand had already reached behind his back. Who knows what Lars can come up with his final strength. In order to avoid a dead end, Jefferson pretended that he saw nothing, walked out of the cabin as if nothing had happened, and let him go. If you can't even get a share of the pie, why are you risking your life? Jefferson's attitude was just like his attitude towards these merchant ships. Although he didn't know what was being transported, as long as you paid the tax, I would still pay it to you. Whose money you make is not earned. As a downstream grey-collar worker, Jefferson was not nervous at all. The territory above would only start a fight with the coalition forces if they were in trouble. Jefferson believed that Linde was a smart man, and even if he did not surrender, he would most likely defect to the elves in the end. The old butler in the cabin breathed a sigh of relief. Even if the magic props in his hand were enough to escape, he didn't want to cause chaos at this time. The old butler looked at the situation along the way and became more and more desperate. The nobles in the western part of the northern border did not hide their united attitude at all, and planned to eat the last piece of cake together. Even these nobles in the western part of the north refused assistance from other places. They said they wanted to get rid of the evil Lars family on their own, but in fact they were afraid that forces from other places would come and divide the cake. Now the old housekeeper just wants to take Ruby to the grey collar smoothly, and then take the two eldest ladies to escape into the Titan Mountains to seek shelter from the elves. But when the merchant ship sailed into grey collar, the old housekeeper discovered that something was wrong. The riverside was full of flat buildings, the huge water wheel was turning slowly, and the nun wearing a bird's beak mask was inspecting everyone on the merchant ship. A person's health status prevents diseases from entering the territory. Although he knew that Miss Reina would deliberately belittle the grey-white collar in her letter in order to ask for more aid, making the grey-white collar look like the streets around the royal capital, the old housekeeper never dreamed that the real grey-white collar would be like this. Look. Grandpa, are we there yet? In order to disguise herself along the way, Ruby had to call the butler Grandpa, but it was no problem. Ruby originally called the housekeeper Grandpa. I'm not sure. When sailing into the grey and white collar port, the old housekeeper still couldn't believe that this was the grey and white collar. The crew members on the side were not surprised and just thought that the other party was a bumpkin from other places. Name, age. The cold voice of the nun in charge of registration brought the old housekeeper back to reality. Only then did the old butler notice that everything in the territory seemed to be under control. This feeling made the old butler very familiar. This is the aura that occurs when a territory enters a state of war. The old housekeeper did not answer the nun's question directly, but took out a token with the North Wind Bear tattooed on it from his arms. Ruby. Elder sister. Sisters Reina and Ruby hugged each other and cried. This was the first time Reina cried loudly after learning about the death of Archduke Lars from the merchants. Sister, I'm so scared. I'm afraid I'll be kidnapped again as soon as I fall asleep. It's okay, sister will protect you. Reina cried and wiped her tears while taking on the responsibility of the eldest sister. Although Reina cried louder than Ruby, her words seemed unconvincing. Seeing that Reina, who had been suppressed for a long time, finally cried, Linde also felt a lot more relaxed. The plot of this world has indeed been turned upside down. Linde never imagined that Lena's uncles would really dare to kill Archduke Lars. Kill. Linde was as surprised when he heard the news as he was when he heard about ISA's rebellion. The grey and white collar workers also entered a state of preparation for war. Although it is not stated explicitly, it is now a recognized fact that the grey white collar has become the last strength of the Lars family in the western part of the northern border. Of course, strictly speaking, there are many people who represent the Lars family better than the grey collar workers, such as Winter Castle, which has not been breached so far, Lena's two missing brothers, and many resistance organizations. But it's useless to say all this now. They just want to eliminate the last viable force of the old Lars family. As for who this viable force is, it doesn't matter. Even Linde, who had not yet married Lena, was inexplicably labeled as Lars's orthodoxy. After all, Linde did not cut off from Lena immediately. Linde could only sigh, it's broken, I have become the orthodoxy. Mr. Linde roar, thank you very much for everything you have done for the eldest lady, but now, I have to take the eldest lady to the elves. Of course, if you are willing, you can come with me. The old butler still respected him very much. After all, Linde did not sell Reina immediately, and even put the territory into a state of preparation for war, which far exceeded the old butler's expectations. Mr. Sebastian, do you mean to let me escape? Linde is not a coward, otherwise he would not put the territory into a state of war preparation, but he is not the kind of person who fights the whole world for a woman in anger. His relationship with Lena is really similar to Lena herself. Gauba brothers, at least that's what Linde thinks of himself at the moment. Does it sound more normal to fight the whole world for brothers? Well, Linde just feels that he cannot surrender, that's all. In the eyes of outsiders, the grey and white collar is completely the territory of the Lars family, and surrender is impossible. Even if you surrender to the other side, you will only be put into the enemy's clothes and continue to fire. Sometimes escaping does not mean failure. We need to accumulate strength and contact other Lars people with righteous hearts. We will always wait until the day of counterattack. This is the safest approach. Lena's uncles have highlighted an unfair position and are still suppressing the rebellion in the territories they captured. According to the old butler Sabas, a place cannot be defended with just grey and white collars. It is even easier to block grey and white collar workers. The most correct thing to do now is to escape to the elves together and seek their protection. But if we just escape like this, wouldn't those weapons we made before be in vain? Moreover, the number of grey collar workers has now grown to thousands, and they are not taken away just because they want. Even if only the core team is taken away, there is no guarantee that the technology will not be leaked, and it may be more difficult to fight by then. Of course, Linde could also just give him a French military salute, but are there really any time travelers that are so stupid? Just as Linde was thinking, another guest came to grey-white collar, and the person trying to persuade him to surrender really came. Chapter 63. Viscount Linde roll, long time no see, long time no see. The person who came to persuade him to surrender was an acquaintance, the same messenger who had given him the marriage certificate. He originally came from the royal capital to give orders to the nobles in the western part of the northern border, but unexpectedly, he came to persuade Linde to surrender again by some strange combination of circumstances. I haven't seen you for a long time, Sir Envoy. I wonder if you are coming to grey-white collar this time. What advice does Sir Envoy have? After Linde settled Ruby and the old housekeeper, he took Reina to meet the envoy. This was requested by Reina herself. Now Reina is very insecure. Maybe she is afraid that Linde will suddenly surrender. Reina, who was originally heroic and brave, is now shrinking behind Linde like a kitten. Mr. Viscount must have already known it. The dark clouds hanging over the northern border have dissipated. The new leader of this area, Count Weskier Evans, couldn't bear to cause more killings, so he asked me to give Mr. Viscount let's talk. After saying that, the envoy took out the letter of surrender from his arms. It was more like a defeat treaty than a surrender letter. Disclosure of the formulas of sugar and recovery potions, active transfer of magic stone veins and other plowing treaties can be said to be everything, which is almost equivalent to selling the entire grey-collar workers. What Linde got was just a false title for promotion to a noble title and the title of city lord of a small corner town. This treaty seemed like they were afraid that if Linde voted, the credit of those gentlemen would be less. They hoped that Linde would resist to the end. Even the messenger came with an attitude of irritating Linde. In his heart, he prayed that Linde would succeed. Don't surrender. Of course, if you are willing to hand over the rebellion of the Lars family, we will provide you with a more generous treaty. After speaking, the messenger glanced at Reina, whose eyes were still red. Unexpectedly, although Linde was quite resistant to the marriage at the beginning, he would now stand with the rebellious Lars family. Reina unknowingly held Linde's left arm, fearing that Linde would really sign the treaty. Your Majesty the Viscount, don't say I didn't remind you that even the rebel leader, Archduke Lars, was completely wiped out by our coalition's offensive. For a moment, Linde didn't know how to complain. If Grand Duke Lars's body was really gone, then Doug Lars might not be able to sleep well at night. Who knows if he escaped with some magic props? And what is this rebellious lord? Is this official? But why does it feel a little off base? It's not just the messenger who said it, right? But Reina was obviously stimulated by this corpse, and she wanted to speak, but she didn't know what to say when the words came to her lips. You didn't see the body? Does that mean Archduke Lars may still be alive? Feeling Lena's grip on her arm, Linde immediately understood what Lena wanted to say and asked for Lena, although he had no idea what it was. Impossible, absolutely impossible, he must be dead. The messenger immediately retorted, and Rena's eyes dimmed. Viscount Linde, I advise you not to take chances. In any case, the death of Grand Duke Lars is an established fact. The new Lars who have been canonized by His Majesty are the future of the North. So are you, Viscount. Smart man, I hope you will not be ignorant and hand over the rebels in your territory, so that I can have an account with the future lord of this territory. Oh? In my opinion, those who kill their fathers and nephews are evil people. Is it really good to let such people become the future of the North? Who is the one who doesn't know what is good and what is evil? Linde immediately took advantage of him and began to retaliate. You. Your Majesty the Viscount, don't think that you can do evil just by relying on 6th level professionals and a bunch of elite cavalry. Let me remind you that the power of old Lars will eventually be wiped out under our iron heel. They are just 50 cavalrymen and a 6th level rebel left behind by the old Lars forces. We have already investigated these clearly. In fact, there was no investigation at all. Do you know how many nobles and professionals there are in our coalition? We have 50,000 heavenly soldiers. We are just waiting for our coalition's heavenly soldiers to arrive. We will make you look good. Of course, these 50,000 heavenly troops include logistics, as well as logistics of logistics. At the same time, there are also cooks for noble gentlemen, as well as the cooks' logistics. Among them are many young wives of noblemen and their support staff. After all, who doesn't want to show off his heroic appearance on the battlefield in front of his most beloved wife? After counting these people and then rounding up, there are 50,000 people, right? At least the envoy did not round up to 100,000 people. It is no secret that the nobles throughout the western part of the north have begun to form a coalition to prepare for the last piece of cake. In any case, it is still a bit too exaggerated to use a single grey-white collar to fight against the entire western part of the northern territory. Reina even wants to give up. It is not unacceptable to really escape to the elves. After giving out the stick, the messenger started giving out carrots again and threw the treaty on the table. If His Excellency the Viscount is willing to lay down his arms and surrender, he will not lose his position as a prince in the future. Why bother supporting a woman now? I still remember that Your Excellency the Viscount was not very satisfied with this marriage at the beginning, right? Linde didn't even glance at the treaty, and said, I thought that Mr. Messenger came from afar and had some high-level opinions. Unexpectedly, he confuses right and wrong in front of me, does not distinguish between good and evil, and even barks. You. A group of people who killed their fathers and nephews and colluded with foreign enemies dare to claim the future of the North? I have never seen such shameless people. After saying that, Linde took the treaty, signed it, and threw it in the envoy's face. The envoy took the treaty and found a word written on it where the signature should have been, read. This was clearly the format for reviewing official documents from subordinates. In an instant, the messenger's blood surged and he fell to the ground. See a visitor out. After finishing speaking, Linde left without looking back, and the attendants also tacitly dragged the envoy out who fell to the ground before he could get up. After the messenger walked away, Linde turned to Reina who was holding her arm tightly and said, Can you let go? Only then did Reina react and immediately let go of her tightly held arms. Linde lifted up his sleeves and found that his arms had been pinched and bruised. Fortunately, Reina didn't really exert any force, otherwise she would have relied solely on the strength of a 6th level knight. I am afraid that my arm will explode on the spot. I'm sorry, brother, I was just a little nervous for a moment, and then. Linde interrupted Reina and said directly, surrender is useless, the other party will not let us go easily. In fact, when the treaty came out, Linde knew that surrender was no longer possible. This group of insects was afraid that someone would surrender and share their cake, so the benefits were probably already distributed internally before the war started. I'm afraid it will be difficult to escape. No matter how great the reputation of Grand Duke Lars is, he is still a dead man. Moreover, Linde has been in contact with elves several times. Although he is very trustworthy, he is still different from the elves in the traditional impression and lacks divinity. There is a lot more humanity, and the factions within the elves are also very complicated and unreliable. Seeing Reina who was still hesitant, Linde sighed helplessly. Unexpectedly, he was originally expected to stop Reina from rebelling, but now he was going to persuade Reina to rebel. But after a little hesitation, Reina nodded, okay, I will listen to my brothers. We will not go to the elves anymore, I want revenge. Behind the scenes, Ruby also pulled the old housekeeper Sebastian out, I'm not leaving either, I want to stay with my sister. The old housekeeper stared at Linde, as if he wanted to understand what Linde was thinking. Feeling the old butler's gaze, Linde asked, what is the situation inside the Lars family now? There may be reinforcements. Winter Castle has not been captured until now. As long as you can hold it, I can try to contact the elders of the Lars family. In fact, they are relying on the remaining prestige of Grand Duke Lars to see if they can attract more people. And there are still many people who are loyal to the eldest son of the Grand Duke. As long as the eldest lady is still here, we should be able to attract many people to come over. Of course, the premise is that we can hold on. The old housekeeper continued to add. Although he said this, the old butler's actual expectations were even more pessimistic. It is estimated that people in Winter Castle are also discussing whether to join the new Lars family or continue to stick to it. Upon hearing the news, Linde just nodded. Then let's fight. The War of Succession is not over yet. Chapter 64. As usual, Jefferson was eating beef, singing songs, and enjoying life with his wife in his arms. Jefferson was amazed when he saw the envoy's angry face turn the color of beef liver before. What exactly happened in the grey-white collar could make the envoy so angry? And after the envoy returned, Weskier immediately sent letters to all the nobles in the western part of the north, agreeing on a time and place, and preparing to fight against the rebellion of old Lars together. It seemed that even Weskier was very angry, which made Jefferson feel extremely happy. Although Jefferson also joined Weskier's camp, the Champagne nobles only maintained superficial harmony among themselves and did not deal with each other in private. What's more, Jefferson has been threatening Weskier's status before, and the relationship between the two is actually very bad. However, as a classic fence-sitter, Jefferson was invited by Weskier to join him in the crusade against Lars. However, because Jefferson was the farthest from Weskier and closest to the grey-collar workers, there was no need to assemble. He only had to wait until the army arrived before joining in. But after all, Faison town is closest to the grey-collar workers, so preparations must be made in advance. At the same time, Jefferson is also thinking about how to prevent the war from affecting Faison town, and how to claim compensation if it does. The merchant's thoughts immediately occupied Jefferson's mind. At this moment, a waiter rushed into Jefferson's dining room in a panic. Lord Viscount, something serious has happened. Jefferson raised his eyes and glanced at the attendants, and reprimanded, how is it appropriate to be in a hurry? Have you forgotten what I told you? As a servant of a nobleman, you must also be elegant. What happened? The attendant immediately stood up, bowed to Jefferson gracefully, and then said, sorry, sir, the grey collar is here. Bang. Jefferson was so frightened that he fell directly under the chair. We're calling, are you sure? Not only did the grey collar man not escape, but he's calling us back. Damn it, is Linde crazy? This was Jefferson's first feeling. After all, the coalition forces have gathered the strength of the entire western part of the Northern Territory. Weskier claimed that there are as many as 50,000 people. Most people would have been scared away when they heard this. Although the water content of these 50,000 people is very large, even if there are 50,000 pigs, all grey and white collar workers will not be able to catch them all. Jefferson originally thought that Linde was going to taunt him and then turn to the Titan Mountains to join the elves directly. After all, the elves seemed to have a good feeling about Linde, but he didn't expect that Linde would actually be tough. And Jefferson immediately reacted. If he really wanted to be tough, the town of Faison, which is located at the closest distance, must be captured. If Faison town is in the hands of the coalition forces, they can attack the grey collar military base at any time. But if in the hands of grey and white collar, Linde can even connect grey and white collar to Faison town. Faison town directly acts as the bridgehead for grey and white collar. With Faison town, grey and white collar can even take the initiative to fight. The reason why he had not run away before was because Jefferson felt that even if the grey-white collar really dared to fight, he would definitely adopt a retreat strategy, defend the grey-white collar and then rely on the Titan Mountains to fight guerrillas until the remnants of the Lars family could rescue him. Unexpectedly, the grey-collar workers even wanted to take the initiative to occupy Faison town. This idea is too radical. You must know that the population of grey-collar workers is not large enough. To divide the troops to occupy Faison town means not only to fight, but also to give up defense and take the initiative. This is completely beyond Jefferson's expectations. After reacting, Jefferson immediately jumped 3 feet high and shouted, ready your horse, run away, hurry up. Faison town is essentially a commercial city, and it is located in the comfortable western part of the north. There is no defense force at all. There is only a night group led by a second-level professional. I heard that the previous demon team disappeared inexplicably near the grey and white collar. After that, many masked nuns appeared inexplicably in the grey collar workers. Jefferson actually knew something. And based on the soldiers he saw in grey collar last time, Jefferson felt that it was impossible to defend the town of Faison. Where are you running away to? Sir Jefferson. As soon as he finished speaking, Jefferson saw the heavily armed Linde burst into his restaurant with several soldiers holding metal fire sticks in their hands. Old brother, why didn't you say anything to me when you came to my place as a guest? I haven't had time to entertain you properly. Jefferson immediately put on another face in embarrassment and rubbed his hands nervously in front of Linde. Why did it come so quickly? The attendant had already called home as soon as he finished reporting. In fact, Linde was a little surprised. In a sense, it had entered a state of war, but the town of Faison was not fortified at all. When Linde led the soldiers into the town, some businessmen along the way were still selling to him commodity. It wasn't until Reyna's knights began to take control of the situation and take over Faison town's city defense that Faison town realized that this was an attack from upstream. Just when the knights of Faison town were about to dispatch, they were suppressed by Reyna's knights and there was no chance of rescue. Linde sat directly opposite Jefferson and said, I believe Mr. Jefferson also knows that some guys in the north colluded with foreign enemies to kill their fathers and nephews, which is not tolerated by heaven and earth. And we should have crusaded against these unfaithful, unfilial, unkind, and unjust people together. However, there are some profit-minded guys who are blinded by money and power. They have become the lackeys of those people and want to attack us grey-collar workers. You know, we grey-collar workers have always been very peace-loving and never provoked any trouble, but now that someone has set their sights on us, we have to resist. Jefferson's eyes were darting around, wanting to drag the professionals to his territory to protect and rescue him, so he started a delaying strategy. That's right, Weskier is really blind when he dares to be such a lackey. Oh, does Mr. Jefferson think so too? That's great. After saying that, Linde took out a stack of letters that he had written long ago and handed them to the attendant beside him. Find a few reliable adventurers and ask them to deliver this letter to Weskier. The attendant took the pile of envelopes and left immediately. Jefferson, who had a keen eye, saw that the envelopes were all written in his own name. Brother, what was written in the letter? It's nothing, it just means that you have clearly realized that Weskier and the others are a bunch of ruthless guys, and the town of Faison has decided to fight to the end with this group of ungrateful beasts. It was a very low-level alienation tactic. The messengers were not even Jefferson's servants, but a group of adventurers. Linde even sent several extra copies to prevent the adventurers from being unreliable. Jefferson secretly laughed in his heart. He and Weskier had been fighting for so many years. How could the other party not notice this low-level alienation plan? Weskier would definitely find a way to rescue him by then. At this time, Linde suddenly said lightly, Mr. Jefferson, are you still imagining that Weskier and his gang will come to rescue you? Jefferson, who had been rubbing his hands with the flies, stopped what he was doing. Yes, this is an obvious divorce plan, but so what? Weskier and the nobles would like to have less people to share the cake, not to mention that Jefferson himself became part of the cake. Jefferson could even imagine that even if he did escape from Linde and escape to the coalition's sphere of influence, those guys with human faces and animal hearts would just kill him and then put on the enemy's clothes with tears in his eyes. At this time, Jefferson realized that the geographical location of Faison town made it impossible for him to be a loser. There were no losers in the world, only useful places and useless places. Faison town had been able to make multiple bets before. It is because the geographical location of Faison town could be regarded as dispensable before. But it's different now. At this moment, several professionals broke in through the window and protected Jefferson. The guards around Linde immediately raised their ray guns and prepared to shoot. Master Jefferson, we are here to save you. Obviously, this professional can be said to be loyal. Even though the town of Faison has been controlled, he still came to rescue Jefferson. But Jefferson slapped him with a firm look in his eyes. Save what? Do I need your help? Didn't you see that I was talking about military aircraft with my brother? Chapter 65. Weskier's face hasn't looked very good lately. The word read can be said to be extremely sarcastic, making Weskier want to rush to the grey collar immediately and beat down the grey collar. But after seeing the letters sent by the adventurers, Weskier laughed again. If you think about it with your toes, you can tell that Jefferson was controlled by the grey collar workers upstream, but Weskier, just as Linde thought, had no intention of rescuing him, and even circulated the letter widely among the coalition forces. Now, there is one less person to share the cake, but there is one more cake. Excited, Weskier opened another bottle of champagne. Although Jefferson fully knew the gathering time, attack time, and marching route of the coalition forces, Weskier changed it lazily and decided to attack according to how he wanted to attack. Because each route is the result of repeated bargaining by each noble. Who will attack which side and who will attack first are all decided by the nobles. If you have to say it, it is a bit like betting on which direction, place, and time Lars's rebellion will escape from, and the nobles are betting on it. The person who bets on the time and place to be able to catch Lars. As the leader of the alliance, Weskier even received a lot of money for this. He had already collected the money, how could he spit it out? This is of course not that Weskier does not pay enough attention to this war, but that this is the case in this era. Even Weskier, as the leader of the coalition, has no dominance over the coalition. The situation is even worse than if my vassal is not my vassal. Because Weskier does not even have the authority to command his own vassal army. Even if they have the right to command, the training methods and command systems of the various nobles are completely different, not to mention the weapons between the various armies, and even the military systems are not unified, and each has its own logistics, so the logistics team of the coalition army is exaggeratedly huge. This is not the most outrageous thing. The command systems between different branches of the same family can even be completely different. If there is a competitive relationship, several branches will add all kinds of messy names to their own military systems, just to get more. It looks more majestic than the other party. Weskier can arrange such a coalition in an orderly manner, and can even direct who goes up first and who goes up last. He is already a rare talent. No wonder the nobles in the north that the Lars family has been able to suppress have been breathless for hundreds of years. Being able to completely unify the military system within the family is already a dimensionality reduction blow in this era. Of course, the nobles also knew the shortcomings of their own military system, and the problems even went beyond that. Most of the people recruited by the nobles are local farmers and idlers, and the small nobles basically do not raise professional soldiers. Almost all of these people have not received training, their combat effectiveness is extremely low, their quality is extremely low, and their desertion rate is terrifyingly high. Those who can carry out military orders are already elite. But these are not problems, because these people are just cannon fodder in the war. This term does not exist in this era, but it will soon. No noble would care about the life or death of these ordinary soldiers. The purpose of these ordinary soldiers' existence is to serve the professional in the team. This is also a tactic inherited from the Cape Kingdom. Professionals lead ordinary soldiers to fight with each other. However, this tactic has gradually been distorted and corrupted during the long inheritance. What should have been a comrade-in-arms relationship between professionals and ordinary soldiers has gradually become a clear-cut relationship of superiors and subordinates, or the relationship between master and slave. The weapons and equipment of those soldiers are all self-prepared. Those with leather armor and pitchforks can be considered well prepared, and those wearing chain armor will be directly awarded military positions, but even if they are equipped with it, doesn't matter how good or bad it is, after all, they are all consumables for filling lines. The real core is still the professionals in the team. But even in terms of professionals, the entire army is still very abstract. It is not strange for a soldier to be called around by 3 or 5 professionals from different forces. The level of the nobles in this regard is not far behind Reina's behavior of letting 3 or 5 knights manage one serf. It is even more normal for a soldier to suddenly turn into another member of the noble army while fighting. Of course, ordinary soldiers are not without benefits. For example, during privateering, professionals will also help. Although most of the privateering has to be handed over to professionals, soldiers wearing professional tiger skins can also be compared to I used to grab more stuff. You ask why privateering is necessary? Sometimes nobles won't be paid even if they win. Who will work if they don't privately? This is even the main source of income for some armies. Soldiers with professionals are often more terrifying than bandits. After waiting for several days, Weskier finally waited for the last noble. I'm sorry, I was afraid that my son wouldn't be able to eat foie gras on the way to the expedition, so I asked the ice profession to prepare frozen foie gras for me for a long time, but it came late. This nobleman obviously brought his family with him, so he had been preparing for a long time. It doesn't matter, everyone else has just arrived. Weskier showed the air of an alliance leader and accepted the nobleman with a smile. This is not a polite statement. Many people completed the assembly under the last timeline. It is not uncommon to drag their families with them. In fact, there are even many noble families who have not come over. They will wait until the army is halfway through. We'll join in. This is a war that will change the ecology of the western part of the north. It is also a gluttonous feast. This war has swept away almost all the nobles in this land. After all, Doug Lars and the Wangdu both lied. Anyone who participated in the siege of the Lars family would be rewarded. Because of these words, all the nobles recruited almost all their family members who could go to the battlefield. Come over. Even if these nobles know that these rewards are actually not much, and are more of an honorary nature, who doesn't have a dream? If they catch some big shot, wouldn't they become famous from now on? What's more, there are compilation bards who write epic poems for themselves. Who doesn't want to leave their name on the epic poem? But there was no rush before departure. Weskier and his allies also watched the expedition performance of the bards led by Lucanus before setting off with satisfaction. The advancing crowd was huge, and everyone had something to say. Laughing, some nobles even lazily rode on horseback and got directly into the carriage with their little wives in their arms. This is a war with a predetermined outcome. This will be a perfect footnote on one's resume. Everyone thinks so. So much so that the whole expedition had an atmosphere like a spring outing, and there were even accompanying bands and minstrels playing and singing. The main function of these bands is to ensure that the 50,000 troops can confirm each other's positions and not get separated from each other. Weskier wore a brand new red cape and put on his most stylish armor, and looked at the endless army stretching in front and behind with high spirits. This would be the perfect starting point for his own epic. Can you win? The envoy from the royal capital who was following Weskier asked. It will win. Weskier issued a declaration of victory. Chapter 66. On the other side, Jefferson cooperated very well and handed over all control of Faison town and lay down obediently. Grey and white-collar people, I believe many of you already know that Grand Duke Lars, who has been helping us develop and fund us, was killed by his sons who sold their souls to the demons. Linde stood on the high platform and carried out the final mobilization for combat. I believe many of you already know the reason why we are here. That's right, after those greedy guys killed our northern Grand Duke, they also tried to get involved in our territory, just like the demons in the past, invading our homeland and destroying our territory. They want us to continue to bear the burden debt continues to allow us to continue to live as cattle and horses for them. Do you want to go back to your old life? In no mood. Both the regular army and the militiamen in the audience were roaring with all their strength. Then what should we do? Defend our home. Yes, all invaders will eventually be defeated, and we will win the final victory. Wonderful victory. Wonderful victory. The first group army of grey-collar workers has been reorganized. The group army includes 300 people, and the original professional soldiers have been organized into officers of various ranks. In fact, the training intensity of even the grey-collar reserve militia is far higher than that of ordinary soldiers in this era. After all, no one in this era will work hard on ordinary soldiers. If Linde is willing, in addition to young and old, thousands of grey and white-collar workers can join him. But there is one military experience in this era that is still applicable, that is, it is difficult for ordinary people without equipment to fight against professionals on the battlefield. 300 people is not the limit for grey-collar workers, but the limit that can be fully equipped with individual equipment at present. Because time is too tight, grey-collar workers without industrial machine tools can produce 300 sets of equipment by hand. The hands of master craftsmen or sparks have already appeared. These 300 people are still people with properties and land in grey and white collars, and no one wants to go back to the past life. Those who were not assigned equipment were given quick training and were converted from militiamen to artillery. Although the individual soldiers were not equipped with enough hot wire guns and equipment backpacks, fortunately, there were many artillery for testing, thanks to the standardization proposed by Linde. These artillery pieces all use the same operating system, and you can get started quickly. In addition, under Flora's strong request, the nun formation was also ready to go to the battlefield. This does not include logistics and the militiamen who set up positions. There are thousands of people in total. Oh, there is also the knights of Faison town, but to be honest, Linde does not expect these knights of the old nobles to be of any use. Fortunately, this knight is unexpectedly loyal and is actually willing to obey Jefferson's command. To do some dirty work. If we follow the calculation method of the opposing coalition forces and round up, Linde's army does not have tens of thousands, but several thousand. All weapons in the laboratory have been pulled out, including many artillery pieces still under experiment, and will be transported to designated locations by logistics and militia labor. The grey-collar administrative department has almost reached its limit, and all factories and craftsmen have switched to the production of weapons, potions, and holy water without stopping. Jefferson watched as ship after ship of weapons and potions that he had never seen before were transported to his territory. Not only the grey-collar workers, but also the entire town of Faison were mobilized to do some of the most basic work, with almost no work. People are free. Is this really war? The mobilization orders one after another completely subverted the traditional aristocratic concept of war like Jefferson's. This was not simply recruiting the young men in the territory to fight, but the entire territory was thrown into the war. And in a corner of Faison town. Brother, are we really not going to find our sister? Colin, who was stirring the silt, asked Sean, who was grinding cement beside him. The heir who was once known as the most promising successor to Grand Duke Lars is now hiding in the town of Faison to make cement for Linde. Wait until I understand this material before going. Sean was grinding the cement with great interest. After passing the information from the guards scattered in different locations and working in different jobs, Sean felt that he had almost figured out the method of making cement, and he had a tendency to become addicted to grinding cement. Why don't you just ask your brother-in-law about this kind of thing? Obviously, Colin was very dissatisfied with his brother dragging him to do rough work. There's a difference in feeling when you find out for yourself and when someone else tells you. Sean ground the cement carefully. And it would be more helpful for our sister to remain hidden than to reveal our identities. Sean looked at the army that had left the city. Although it is hard to believe that my sister Lina and the Grey-Collar Lord can win, the appearance of Sean and Colin will increase the variables for my sister Lina. After all, who knows that my uncles will know that their nephews and nieces are there? In a place, would you leave the territorial rebellion alone and just attack here? Let your uncles look for it again. Hey, you guys. The clerk in charge of this area came over, and the workers working nearby immediately gathered around. This is today's salary. The clerk paid every worker a salary, and the workers in Faison town were even more grateful. They felt that a war was coming, but they could no longer escape, but the big boss from the upper reaches came and gave them a lot of money. The work and wages were still paid on the same day, and the public security in Faison town had become better than ever, so everyone stayed here. After all, even if you escape, where can you escape to? After receiving his salary, Colin couldn't help but sigh, it's such a small amount of money after a hard day's work. It's not even enough for my daily meals before. Sean frowned. This is already a lot. At least it is much larger than your previous territory. I have told you many times that you should be kind to your own people. However, you are still expropriating and expropriating. In the end, your territory actually opened the door. Welcome our uncle. Even if you pay 1/3 of the wages to those workers, they will not be reduced to this. Colin said disdainfully, brother, you are here again. After talking so much, wasn't your territory also invaded? What's the difference between you and me? Of course there is a difference. Sean's territory is still resisting, but Colin's territory has no news at all. But Sean just held his forehead helplessly. Colin was pampered too much and was a little too naughty. On the side, the secretary continued, we still need people to transport the artillery shells. The salary is about 3 times that here. Is anyone going to go? Sean's eyes lit up and he immediately pulled Colin to raise his hand. The secretary looked at the two brothers up and down. Although they were white and tender, they were still strong enough. Then he ordered a few more workers and took these people to prepare to carry the cannons out of the city. Brother, are you crazy? There are secret guards in the city who can protect us. What will we do if we leave the city? But Sean said indifferently, don't you want to see how the grey and white collar lord plans to fight? How to fight? No matter how we fight, we will lose anyway. We might as well find a way out early and vote for the elves. Why are we here to watch the joke? If we are caught, we will be finished. Sean shook his head, but I think I can win. Colin was about to stop Sean and tell him that this was unrealistic and that it would be more practical to go out of the city and find a chance to escape. However, when he stopped Sean, Colin found that his brother was trembling with excitement. This was serious. Chapter 67. Yolanda is the leader of the Knights of Faison town, but unfortunately her opportunity was stolen before she could perform. This can't be blamed on the Knights of Faison town. After all, not only did no one expect that the Grey Collar would come, but their opponents were 50 elite knights led by Reina, and they had no chance to resist. However, Jefferson usually did not treat the knights badly. These knights were all from the town of Old Faison, so they were quite loyal. But just when Yolanda was preparing to fight to the death, news came that Jefferson had surrendered. At this moment, Yolanda was standing on the valley, letting the breeze blow her brown ponytail, watching the artilleryman leading the workers from Faison town to set up the artillery pieces one after another. Even a layman could tell that this was a very suitable place for an ambush, but according to the intelligence from the scouts, the coalition brigade was still heading this way. After all, the imaginary enemy of the coalition brigade is Lina and the 50 Lars cavalry. Even if 50 professionals rush down the hillside, so what? As long as they fall into the crowd, they will be meat on the chopping board. People are slaughtered. Yolande glanced around the camp in the valley. They were efficient, capable, and disciplined. It could be said that it was completely different from the battlefield environment that Yolande was familiar with. A real battlefield camp shouldn't be filled with military gangsters and hooligans, with everyone joking and laughing with each other to relieve tension. They don't care about military orders at all. They wait until the orders are given before picking up weapons, charging, and then pretending to be dead. But to be honest, Yolande prefers the current atmosphere. This kind of camp is more like a knight's camp. Sir Lorry, is this really okay? The knights in Faison Town are assigned to some extremely simple tasks. They basically only need to be responsible for carrying and loading artillery shells. They can be competent after simple training. Even because the artillery is equipped with rifling from the beginning, it does not need to be like this. The old-fashioned artillery needs to be wiped every time it fires. Aiming and firing were left to the grey-collar artillerymen who did not receive weapons. This made the idle Yolande very uneasy. The battlefield should not be like this. Don't be nervous, we just need to wait for the signal and then fire. It's simple, right? Lorry held a piece of wild grass in his mouth and observed the nearby terrain. This valley is not a real ambush point. The ambush point should be the forest not far after passing the valley, because the opponent's team is too long. If they intercepted in the valley, they may be reacted by the opponent. They all ran away. Lorry was actually very nervous about this battle, but he was also very confident. He had personally fired every cannon here, and he knew the power very well. Considering the density of the opponent's army, he fired with his eyes closed. That's it. If you really want to say it, being able to fight such a satisfying battle would make Lorry feel that even death would be worth it. And as a veteran on the battlefield, Lorry knew that sometimes the most damaging thing on the battlefield was not the opponent's powerful magic, but his own people who fled crazily in the chaos. The battlefields of this era are not yet invisible to each other. They still have to attack with real swords and guns. Friendly troops who do not cooperate and ignore discipline are sometimes more terrifying than the enemy troops who have not yet arrived. If you are scared, it doesn't matter if you run back now. After all, there are 50,000 people on the other side. Lorry looked at the trembling knights of Faison Town, which reminded him of the days when he was in the Lars Frontier Army. The comrades who were still chatting and laughing disappeared unknowingly, and were gradually replaced by these new recruits' balls that begin to tremble before they even go to the battlefield. No, since we have received the order from the Lord and accepted your gift, then naturally we will fight together to the end. After saying that, Yolande tapped the armor issued by her grey-white collar. This is much better than what Jefferson sent out. Originally, the knights had been comfortable for too long, and their weapons, let alone their armors, were almost like pitchforks, but now for Yolande, it can be said that it is a shotgun exchange for a cannon. Especially the fluctuations of magic power flowing in the gaps in the armor prove that this set of armor is really enchanted armor. Even if it is only the lowest level of enchantment, it is already quite luxurious for Yolande, a second-level knight in the countryside. Yes. Not to mention that most of the knights are not professionals, just ordinary people with some courage. After putting on this armor, they can't even bear to take it off. Of course, what Yolande envied most was Lorry's ray gun. In fact, when Lorry originally demonstrated it to Yolande, Yolande didn't feel anything special. Isn't it just a magic prop that can use second-level magic? As the leader of the army, it is normal for the Lord to give a magic prop. But Yolande soon discovered that although there were no artillery positions, the main soldiers with grey and white collars and those strange nuns wearing masks were there. Moreover, Lorry would pretend to be casual and show off in front of Yolande from time to time, wiping it and testing it. The most painful thing is not whether he has you or not, but that everyone has it but you don't. What's more, Lorry still has an expression of come and ask me every day. Out of curiosity and courtesy, Yolande had no choice but to ask when Lorry took out his ray gun to clean it again, did your lord give this too? Hearing this question, Lorry's face showed unprecedented satisfaction, and he began to enthusiastically introduce the ray gun to Yolande. At this time, the secretary also came to the valley with a new batch of shells. Lorry and the secretary discussed whether some civilians who could transport the artillery shells could be left to assist in loading the artillery. After all, the knights in Faison Town still needed to be responsible for security, and the manpower in the shelling camp was somewhat stretched, so it was only possible to help load the artillery. Some simple jobs can be done by smart people. After discussing with the civilian husband, the secretary left a few civilian husbands who seemed to be smarter to stay to assist the artillery. But when Yolande looked at the two fair and tender civilian husbands among them, she felt something was wrong. Logically speaking, these civilian husbands should be talents from Faison Town, but as the leader of the Knights of Faison Town, Yolande but he was quite unfamiliar with the two civilian husbands. If the civilian husbands are relatively fair and tender, it can be explained by the fact that bankrupt rich farmers came to Faison Town to seek refuge. However, the temperament of one of the civilian husbands was so outstanding that Yolande, who had been with the aristocratic model Jefferson for a long time, was keenly aware of that the civilian husband may have been a noble before, and he came from a noble family. Yolande even felt that she should have met the other party before. The other party was definitely a very famous nobleman, but Yolande could never remember who the other party was. Yes, that's it. I'm optimistic about you, young man. Lorry was very satisfied with these civilians, especially the fair and tender young man. Although it was a bit awkward to load the cannon for the first time, he was able to master it as soon as he learned it. He even wanted to recruit him into his team. Looking at the young man who was a little embarrassed but smiling at Laurie's praise, Yolande shook her head. Maybe she had made a mistake. How could a real noble be complacent because of a soldier's praise? Chapter 68. In the camp in Faison town, carrier pigeons and scouts carrying orders were constantly coming in and out of the camp, allowing Linde to grasp the latest trends of the Weskier coalition at the first time. 50,000 coalition troops, regardless of division, came directly towards us. As an honors student who graduated from the Royal Capital Academy, ISA repeatedly confirmed the information in her hand. This was so unreasonable that ISA always felt that it must be a scam. This is normal. Jefferson on the side kept wiping the beads of sweat from his forehead, regretting his decision to sit on the wall. At the same time, he explained to ISA, the coalition army does not have 50,000 people at all. The real number is only about 20,000 to 30,000 at most, and this there are also many of their relatives and even cooks. Not to mention that the cook has to bring a lot of logistics. The servants used to maintain the dignity of these nobles account for about 1/3. It is difficult to command such a heavy team to divide the troops into attacks. After hearing this explanation, ISA exclaimed, "Is this how you nobles fight? No wonder the border is fought like this." "No, madam, we nobles are more exaggerated than you think." After speaking, Jefferson took out a plan and put it on the table. ISA didn't speak for a long time after reading it. The plan detailed in the plan which noble would hold a position after surrounding the grey-white collars, which was equivalent to placing a bet on where the grey-white collars would break out of the encirclement. Of course, there are also bets on grey and white collars that will surrender, but the odds are very low, which is far less exciting than betting on a position. In order to prevent someone from going ahead to occupy a better position, the entire coalition army is managed uniformly, and it is impossible to divide the troops. Jefferson, who changed his handkerchief and continued to wipe his sweat, continued to explain that he was almost dehydrated from sweating in the past few days, especially as the coalition forces gradually approached. This is too exaggerated. ISA had imagined the lower limit of the nobles, but the nobles proved it with actual actions. My lower limit is beyond your imagination. Linde put away the new information, looked at the map and said, "Don't underestimate the enemy, but don't be too nervous. Just follow the planned actions." Counting the 300 soldiers equipped with individual combat backpacks, as well as Rena's knights and nuns, the two sides can indeed be considered to be equally matched in terms of professionals. If the other side's army cannot take a frontal stance, it's almost like calling them paper tigers. In the chaos, those ordinary people who came to fight only after being recruited by the Lord are a burden. The closer the opponent was, the calmer Linde became. At this time, Rena walked in wearing a huge armor that was completely inconsistent with her figure. "How about brother, do you look like my grandfather?" Although it is more bulky, as a 6th level professional, Rena can still use her arms and fingers. Rena swept away her previous melancholy, and became even more excited as the war approached, as if Lars' war bloodline was constantly awakening. Linde, who had never met Archduke Lars, didn't know how to respond, so he could only say, "Remember, don't be obsessed with fighting. We don't only have this chance. If we are seen through, we will run to the minefield. Do you understand? Your safety is more important than anything else. Don't worry, brother, no one in the entire northern border is my opponent." After saying that, Lina, who was wearing huge armor, also made a gesture to show off her muscles, although nothing could be seen. Seeing Rena gradually starting to lose her connection again, Linde could only say to Susan next to Rena, "Protect your young lady, do you understand? Swear to protect to the death." At this time, an attendant came in and reported, "Sir, the artillery positions in the forest are ready." Upon hearing this report, Rena immediately put on her helmet. "Well brother, I'm going." On the other side, most of the coalition forces led by Weskier have entered the valley, and Weskier, who is at the head of the coalition forces, is leading his followers out of the valley. "Lord Evans, are we really going to leave the valley like this?" Seeing the endless team slowly advancing in the valley, the envoy from the royal capital was very worried. Even the envoy who did not understand military affairs at all could see that if there was an ambush in the valley, the coalition forces could be divided in an instant into two sections. But Weskier, who had had a little drink, blushed and said, "Your Majesty the messenger, have you heard of Lars' joke?" The envoy shook his head. The envoy from the royal capital was indeed not very familiar with the northern border. Once the knights of the Lars family wanted to chase 3 or 2 demons on the other side of the river. Because the river was too deep and there was no bridge, the knights had to take out their bows and arrows and shoot at them. But who knew that the blood magic of the demons on the other side was specializing in restraining bows and arrows? A group of knights could only scratch their hair through their helmets while facing the 3 or 2 demons on the other side of the river. Ha 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 ha, don't these knights even know a little bit of magic for long-range attacks? The envoy from the royal capital laughed and felt much relieved after hearing this. Although this story was probably fabricated, the knights of the Lars family did lack long-range attack methods. Not only that, these tortoise-shell knights are also incapable of killing. They often kill more than a dozen people on the opposite side in a battle, which has become a joke in the north. Weskier added, "If our opponent is a group of spellcasters, then we will indeed suffer heavy losses when walking in this valley, but our opponent is a group of knights from the Lars family, ha 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 ha, I have already started to laugh." The envoy from the royal capital also flattered, "Your Excellency Evans is really a master of military warfare. He has already studied the opponent carefully. It's a pity that there is a traitor Jefferson among us. Otherwise, the remnants of the old Lars would never have thought that we would come from behind. Go directly to Grey Collar here. It doesn't matter. Weskier said nonchalantly, I would also like to thank Jefferson, otherwise as the starting point of my epic, this battle would be too boring. Lucanus next to him also flattered, that's it. Full of dramatic betrayal and unknown is a wonderful epic. Not bad, Xiao Lu, I just thought of 2 poems that can be the beginning of my epic story. How about you take a look? Just when Lucanus was about to gallop forward, a deep muffled sound came from the front. Probably because he drank some wine, Weskier clearly heard this sound from the noisy sounds around him. Did it thunder when I just left the valley? Weskier frowned. This is not a good sign. If it rains, the nobles in the back team will definitely complain. Let alone the dignity of the nobles when soaked in water. As for marching in the rain? On a rainy day, shouldn't we camp on the mountain and enjoy the beautiful scenery? Thinking of this, Weskier looked up the valley behind him, trying to find a suitable location on the valley for viewing. Then, just when Weskier looked up, the muffled sound came again, and this time the muffled sound was very close, just above him. Weskier clearly saw something approaching rapidly in the sky. A huge cannonball whizzed through the air, hitting Weskier's surroundings with destructive power. The shell exploded on the ground, and the soil and gravel were violently lifted up, forming a black smoke and dust barrier. Weskier's armor showed gorgeous runes, but then more shells fell, causing successive explosions. Even though he was wearing enchanted armor, Weskier still felt as if his chest had been hit. The sweetness in his throat surged up, and a mouthful of blood spurted out from Weskier's mouth. Weskier was shaken by the impact and lost his balance. It fell immediately. But the explosion did not stop, as if hundreds of spellcasters were constantly casting rain of destruction, and the thunder was a warning of raindrops. Not only was Weskier's vanguard unit under attack, but the same muffled sound also sounded in the valley behind, and the entire coalition army was in chaos. The entire valley was full of fire mixed with smoke and dust, the wreckage was accompanied by screams, and enchanted lights flashed everywhere, but more often than not, ordinary soldiers and horses that had lost control were constantly attacking their companions in the chaos. The vanguard was not much better. The large number of ordinary soldiers immediately became confused. Some wanted to escape into the valley, while others scattered outside the valley. The expensive enchantment helped Weskier survive the explosion, and the followers around him were loyal enough to form a circle among the chaotic crowd, allowing Weskier to avoid being trampled by the crowd. Enemy attack? But why didn't the casters in front detect the magic reaction? When did the Lars family have such a terrifying long-range attack method? Weskier's brain and armor were buzzing. Could it be that the Lars from Winterfort came to support him? Just when the explosions gradually subsided and Weskier, who thought he could breathe a sigh of relief, helped his subordinates to get up, the troops who had been holding fire sticks and carrying strange backpacks appeared in front of them at some point. Before the coalition forces at the head could react, raindrop-like molten rays began to harvest the lives of the front-row coalition forces like the scythe of death. Especially those troops with conspicuous noble flags. Before Weskier could get up, the followers supporting him were shot through by molten rays. Weskier, who fell to the ground again, saw Lucanus not far away and immediately roared, Lucanus! Give me a hand! Weskier kept shouting amidst the explosions, but Lucanus seemed not to hear it. He looked blankly at the gunfire in the sky through his blindfold, and at the same time, there was an unexplained happy smile on his face. Lucanus! Are you deaf? I want you to give me a hand. Weskier, who was constantly being hit by the crowd, yelled angrily, but probably because Lucanus' costume was too conspicuous among a group of soldiers, Lucanus, who was still in a daze, was immediately hit by several rays, and hit head-on by a shell. Weskier, who was blown away, witnessed Lucanus being torn apart. Chapter 69. The casters in the team immediately supported the barrier, but their biggest enemy was not the artillery fire, but the completely out-of-control army. Not only the disorderly crowds, but also the frightened war horses being dragged by their owners, became the source of chaos at the mouth of this narrow valley. Some inexperienced professionals tried to rally the team again, but the truly experienced veterans had already huddled in the corner with their followers, holding up magic barriers and positions to preserve their strength. No one noticed that Lucanus had a complete mouth left after being blown to pieces, and the mouth that had lost its throat and brain was still talking on the ground. Yes, this is the feeling, this is the taste, ah, this is really great. While the mouth was talking, an invisible force moved the nose scattered elsewhere and spliced a euro it to the top of the mouth. The nose greedily breathed in the surrounding air. Ah, the smell of blood and fire is so wonderful and so violent. This will definitely become the cornerstone of the empire. The invisible force pulled out the eyeball from the crack in the stone and placed it where it should be. This is the scene. This is the most wonderful beginning of the epic. Ah, I have already felt it, I feel it, the glory of the empire is gradually returning. It has been 1,000 years, a full 1,000 years, ha 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 ha. Brain trembling. While the mouth was speaking, the invisible force had sucked all the brain flowers back, and the brain flowers trembled in response to the mouth. At this time, the coalition forces in the valley were also being bombarded indiscriminately. Although they were in chaos, they were still struggling to hold on. Those who were defeated were ordinary people's troops. The professionals had shrunk their troops and opened up the barrier, but in the chaos, no one cares whether the barriers or positions of the professionals belong to their own team. Everyone squeezes towards these unfolded barriers, which in turn aggravates the chaos. And what really caused the coalition forces in the valley to collapse was the chaos of the vanguard. The good news is that although the opponent has set up artillery in the forest, the terrain outside the valley is open. Although the first army is blocking the door, the impact is not as great as in the valley. The bad news is that during the artillery fire, a group of cavalry waving the flag of Grand Duke Lars rushed out amidst the smoke in the sky. Archduke Lars is resurrected. Archduke Lars is not dead at all. The nobles and soldiers who saw this flag shouted and immediately got into a mess. Reina wore a huge armor imitating Archduke Lars and led the cavalry to charge towards the coalition forces. According to Linde's instructions, Reina specifically stared at the nobles wearing gorgeous armor. Reina, who was fully knighted, felt like she was in no one's land. Even if the armor did not fit at all, she still crushed everyone present. Before the leading noble could react, Lars' ancestral long-handled battle axe hit the noble heavily, and all the enchantments and runes were smashed to pieces, killing him with one blow. The gradually condensing chill in the knight's stance and the most elite knights of Lars all hinted at the identity of this charging force. Amidst the roar of the artillery, Reina was like an evil spirit resurrected from hell, waving the battle axe in her hand and killing nobles one after another. Countless magics were thrown at these Lars knights in an unorganized manner in the chaos. At this time, no one dared to tell the Lars knight joke anymore. Once the Lars knight, nicknamed the Turtle, stepped into the front of the chaos, the battlefield is a destructive existence. Ordinary magic cannot even break through the opponent's defense, but the Lars knight in close proximity is fatal to these professionals. The calm nobles immediately realized that the Archduke Lars on the other side should be Reina pretending to be the one, but it was too late. The news of the resurrection of Archduke Lars spread to the entire team with the chaos, becoming the last step to crush the coalition forces. Straw. The morale of the entire coalition army has completely dropped with the resurrection of Archduke Lars. There may be some somewhat capable nobles who are still stabilizing their morale and organizing counterattacks, but the truly smart nobles have already started to look for a way out with their own troops. Regardless of whether Archduke Lars is really resurrected, Reina's effect is no different from Archduke Lars. Under normal circumstances, no matter how powerful Reina is, once she is held back by the frontline troops, her role will be limited. But the front row troops were defeated by the artillery. The professionals, not to mention joining forces to restrain Reina, even tried their best to protect themselves. But as Jefferson said, even if there were 50,000 pigs, it would be impossible to catch them all. Professionals who gathered immediately began to fight back, and some even used trap magic to delay Linde's actions. There are many truly strong men among the coalition forces. After the professional used trap magic, he immediately organized the people around him and shouted, "This Archduke Lars is fake. It's time to delay our counterattack by delaying them." Soon more professionals realized this problem and began to rally towards that professional. These terrifying explosions should be the exploding trebuchets used by the other party, not magic. The Knights of Lars are notorious for lacking long-range means. The fake Archduke can use his own position to build a road and ignore the pitfalls, but the knights around her cannot. Although this is just a delaying tactic, as long as the opponent is delayed, you can always rely on numbers to wait for the opportunity to counterattack. The next second, the second-order molten rays poured out like horizontal rain. With the entry of the Lars knights, the artillery fire in the forest gradually stopped, but the first group of soldiers had already charged with the Lars knights, and began fire support instead of the artillery. The clerk waved the flag and led the charge. Soldiers equipped with ray guns and tactical backpacks rushed out of the ambush point and began to cooperate with the knights on the battlefield to advance and harvest. In the battlefield, Darcy's trigger-pulling hand was even a little numb. This thing was much easier to use than a bow and arrow. When he was a savage hunter, he was always on target. With the ray gun, he was even more bright on the battlefield. Whether the light is the enchantment runes of nobles or the spell models of spellcasters, just shoot it and that's it. The originally gorgeous runes and magic of the nobles became life-threatening talismans on the battlefield. Everything was over. The knights supported by ray guns made up for the final shortcomings. Lars's knights used their steel bodies to attack the opponent's flag unscrupulously. One after another, nobles threw away their flags, took off their cloaks, and even took off their heavy armor, and fled with their guards. The news that Archduke Lars and his loyal knights were resurrected immediately spread to every corner of the coalition with the rout. When the nobles whose valley was bombarded by artillery fire heard the news, they immediately recalled their professionals who were still struggling to support themselves and fled out of the valley. Stupid people think that Grand Duke Lars has been resurrected, or is not dead at all. At this time, he should flee back to his territory as soon as possible and sever ties with the coalition forces to avoid being liquidated. Smart people have already guessed that Grand Duke Lars is a fake, but it doesn't matter. Even if it is fake, it is real now. Take advantage of the opportunity to escape now to preserve your strength and continue to escape back and ride on the wall. The nobles walking at the back immediately began to retreat without looking back. The professionals brought by the nobles immediately fled with their employers. They were just here to hang out. How much money does it cost per month? What kind of fate are they playing? This coalition that came for profit eventually fell apart to protect their own interests, and no one wanted to stand up and turn the tide. Lori, who was standing on the top of the mountain, looked at the flashing ray gun light in the distance and said, "It seems that the battle in front has been completed, and the first group army has begun to harvest." Glancing at the corpses scattered all over the valley below, Lori sighed with emotion. Didn't they really just bring the cooks? I thought someone would rush to the valley to fight with us, and I was even prepared to sacrifice. Yolanda on the other side asked in disbelief, "Is it over?" "No." Lowry aimed his ray gun at the bottom of the valley and said, "Don't relax, the war is not over yet. Keep an eye on it. If you die at this time, you will suffer a big loss. Moreover, cleaning up the remaining soldiers is the real battlefield. An army of 50,000 people will be defeated very quickly, but with our small number of people, how to prevent the enemy from resurrecting will be more difficult than defeating them now." Yolanda still had no sense of reality. She looked at the people in the distance throwing away their armor and fleeing in horror. She could feel that many professionals below did not even use their full strength, but only resisted symbolically, and then immediately retreated. Stand up and conserve your strength. Is this how the war ends? At this time, Sean, who was pretending to be a civilian husband, looked at the corpse under the valley with a twisted smile on his face. One? Really one? The lord of the grey-white collar? No, it should be his brother-in-law, actually one like this? Sean squatted next to the artillery, his legs were shaking. If it were him, would he win? Sean didn't know, but even if he had these weapons, his first thought would definitely be to wait for support. After all, these artillery pieces it is inconvenient to move, and it should have been used for city defense from the beginning. At this moment, Sean finally understood why his grandfather always said that he didn't have the courage to risk everything. Looking at the victory in front of him, Sean clearly realized that he might not be suitable for the position of heir. Yes, this position should go to the grey and white lord. No, it should be the brother-in-law. Only the brother-in-law can lead him to revenge, and only the brother-in-law who masters these skills is the most suitable to be Lars' heir. Only a brother-in-law can make Lars great again. Colin's eyes were even crazier. Colin even felt that the battles he fought with his uncles in the past were nothing compared to this. The extortionate expropriations in the past were even more meaningless. No amount of wealth could replace this moment. The joy of victory, even though it was just standing on the top of the mountain and firing cannons, this sense of participation made Colin extremely satisfied. Fighting is fun. Chapter 70. Weskier, who was hanging on the horse, finally vomited in the bumps. When the followers saw that Weskier was awake, they quickly stopped and helped Weskier off his horse. Water, give me water. Weskier snatched the water bag from the subordinate's waist and drank a big gulp before he woke up. After being blown away, Weskier lost consciousness after seeing the torn-apart Lucanus, but now it seems that his followers hung him on the horse and escaped. To be able to bring Weskier out of the chaos, these followers really did their best. Lost. Weskier's mouth uttered two simple syllables. His voice was small, as if he wanted to confirm the outcome of the war, but he was afraid that his followers would really tell him. Sir, at least when we escaped, the coalition forces were defeated. Then where are we now? The valley was in great chaos at that time. It was impossible to go back from the valley. All we could do was take you to escape in one direction. Now you are near the River of Tears. Before the subordinate could finish speaking, Weskier punched the subordinate in the face. UBD. Why didn't you wake me up? If I were here, I would be able to turn the tide and command the coalition forces to repel all those Ralals. It's all because of you. Yes, it's because of you that I failed. This failure not my problem. Then Weskier grabbed the attendant angrily and asked, are you the other party's undercover agent? Tell me quickly. Did you accept a bribe from Lars? Sir, I have been in the Evans family since I was a child. Have you forgotten? Originally, Weskier just planned to distance himself from the defeat and immediately put down the retinue. Now that the reason was found, Weskier no longer had any psychological burden and asked directly, what should we do now? Find the way back first, sir. We have identified the general direction, and we have war horses. We will be able to return to the territory soon. Weskier nodded. As long as he returned to his territory, he would be able to make a comeback soon. However, in order not to attract attention, Weskier took off the armor on his horse and subordinates and walked in the direction of his territory. As evening approached, Weskier's stomach began to growl, so he turned towards the guard door and asked, have you brought anything to eat? The servants looked at each other. The food was all at the cook's place, but the cook had long since disappeared in the explosion. At this time, a plume of smoke happened to rise not far away, and Weskier led the servants to explore it cautiously. After pushing aside the bushes, Weskier saw a camp where dinner was being burned, and a group of nuns in the camp were kneeling and praying with their backs to him. It turned out to be just a group of nuns. Weskier was relieved. It might just be nuns from a certain church who were visiting to spread the gospel and set up a camp to rest on the road. After confirming that there were only nuns, Weskier arranged his clothes and put on the spare cloak handed over by his subordinates to make himself look more like a noble, and then stepped into the camp with proud steps. Hey! Are you nuns from the Church of the Goddess of Light? I am a believer in the goddess. I need your... Before Weskier could finish speaking, the nuns all turned their heads. The faces of these nuns were all wearing strange beak masks, and the eyes of the masks were also glowing with strange red light. This was when they found prey. Eyes. Are you a cultist? What are you going to do? I am a noble champagne aristocrat. I have a lot of money. I will give you whatever you want. Before he could finish speaking, Weskier saw the nuns pick up the metal fire sticks on their legs and stand up. Weskier recognized that one. It was the same fire stick that fired molten rays on the battlefield. The goddess actually answered our prayers again. Thank you to the goddess for your gift. These were the last words Weskier heard before he fainted. At this time, Linde did not dare to slack off at all in the camp. Almost all the troops were sent out to hunt down the fleeing nobles. These were not only actual results, but also to prevent these nobles from really going back to make a comeback, especially its Weskier. However, after experiencing such a defeat, it is estimated that it will be difficult for the nobles to organize an attack again in a short time. Rather, if there are nobles who can organize an attack again, then I am afraid that the defeat will not be so fast this time. Many nobles even surrendered directly, and they were arrogant when they surrendered, thinking that they could get preferential treatment. This is also the thinking of traditional noble wars. If you lose the battle, don't you have to pay a ransom? And since you are the eldest brother who leads the surrender, shouldn't the other lord treat you preferentially to attract more people to surrender? But these nobles may have forgotten that they originally came here to gain military exploits without leaving any survivors. One of the reasons for the grey white-collar workers to fight back is revenge. This is a war that kills people, not a petty fight between nobles. Noisy. Linde's constant sending of people to search for these fleeing nobles also showed his attitude. These eldest brothers were soon removed from all their equipment and imprisoned. This war went more smoothly than Linde imagined. Not to mention the subsequent minefields, ISA's meteorites were not even dispatched. Although Linde did not place his hopes of victory on this kind of metaphysics at the beginning. Although almost all the camp was mobilized to search for these nobles, to be honest, Linde was still relatively relaxed, and he was not worried about any unsighted people who would dare to come and steal the house. If you want to ask why, Rena still stayed in the camp. At this time, Rena was wearing single clothes and walked into Linde's tent holding a roast duck. Brother, it's time for dinner. Linde and Rena squatted in front of the big tent as usual, tearing apart the roast duck on the plate, watching the sun slowly set in the distance, and after the breeze blew, the moon and stars gradually appeared. In fact, Linde doesn't like this posture very much. If possible, Linde would prefer to sit on a chair, but Rena likes this posture very much, because for her, it is the most violative of etiquette and the most comfortable posture for chatting. Linde gradually got used to being on the same level as Rena. Rena had just finished taking a shower. After all, she had just come off the battlefield and was wearing extremely ill-fitting armor, so she must have been sweating all over. The scent of soap locust mixed with the smell of blood on the battlefield blew to Linde's side with the evening breeze. This was the first time Linde smelled this smell. Did you use soap bars? Linde asked curiously. After all, although every noble family has a specialized soap maker who uses the most expensive soap locust made by alchemy, Lina has never used this kind of thing, and even came to grey white collar I didn't even bring the soap maker with me. Last time, I asked my grandpa to send 2 soap locusts over, but I forgot to use them. This thing is really difficult to use. I washed it for a long time and couldn't get rid of the smell of blood. The breeze blew the girl's golden threads, and the girl squatting on the ground flipped her hair to avoid being messed up by the evening breeze. How's it going? Do you like it? The girl didn't know what she was asking, but only now did Linde realize that the girl in front of him who had just retreated from the battlefield and still smelled of blood was his fiancé copyright. Before Linde could answer, Rena broke off a big greasy duck leg and handed it to Linde. Come on, brother, I'll give you this. This is strong enough. The beautiful filter instantly shattered to pieces. Thank you. Linde, who was speechless, grabbed the duck leg and started to chew it. Angrily. Chapter 71. After reading today's victory report and the territory's production status, Linde looked up and found that Rena had already fallen asleep. It looked like he had been asleep for a long time. The quilt had been kicked everywhere, the hair had leaked out, and a small piece of his clothes had been lifted up at some point. His right hand was still scratching his belly, and he looked completely sleepy. As a time traveler, the last thing Linde could tolerate was someone sleeping with their navel exposed, so Linde, who was suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder, helped Rena cover herself with a quilt. Looking at Rena's leisurely sleeping posture, Linde remembered the words again, do you like it? This question may no longer need to be answered. Both parties have become a part of their respective lives. At this time, Rena was sleeping on a temporary camp bed set up in the camp tent, right next to Linde's office, but it seemed to be fine at ordinary times. Rena seemed to have slept after listening to Linde's report several times before. He walked over and simply slept next to Linde's desk. The sleeping appearance also changed from the sleeping beauty at the beginning to become more and more unrestrained. It seemed that being by Linde's side made Rena more and more relaxed. Just like a cat, it is very wary in the wild and does not dare to sleep deeply. Even when asleep, it maintains a fighting posture. However, after being adopted for a long time, its sleeping posture begins to become abstract. According to Lina herself, even in her sleep, as long as someone steps into her night realm, she can react immediately, including Lina's nights, so Lina can rest assured and boldly sleep vigil. But this does not apply to Linde at all. No matter whether Linde is coming in and out to get documents, or helping to cover the quilt, Rena has no reaction. If the maid hadn't accidentally slipped her foot while delivering the documents to Linde, stepping into the tent, Linde even felt that Rena's knighthood had failed. After extinguishing the lantern, Linde walked out of the camp tent. The guards outside had been waiting for a long time. You have a strange prisoner, haven't you? Yes sir. The guard explained, he wore a strange costume and was blindfolded. He claimed to be a compilation bard and came to us. We tried many methods to control him, including tying him with ropes and locking him in a cell. He was able to break free of the shackles. The guard's descriptions became increasingly weird, and Linde also saw the shackled bard in the cell with a lamp. King. My noble king, it is an honor to meet you. I am your most loyal jester Lucanus. Across the iron fence, the shackled Lucanus became extremely excited after seeing Linde, and gave a big salute, but during the salute, the shackles blocked Lucanus' movements. When Lucanus saw this, he retracted his hand and the shackles fell off, and then continued to salute meticulously. It was indeed very strange. When Linde saw this, he touched his chin and began to think. Lucanus's movements were a bit like the bone shrinking technique, but it was different from the bone shrinking technique that Linde had seen in his previous life. Lucanus was not only more fluent. There is absolutely no preparation required, and more importantly, this set of movements gives people the feeling that this body is not their own. To Lucanus, the body was like a toy that could be kneaded at will. My noble king, are you satisfied with your jester's first performance? Lucanus was prostrate on the ground, as if he were a jester. Are you mistaken? I am just a viscount from the border area, not your king. The attendant brought a chair, and Linde sat down easily. Linde has always been on guard against bards. Most of the bards work as spies. They may be double agents, or even more ownerless spies. They are only responsible for collecting information and then selling it. It doesn't matter whose information you steal or sell to. If the merchants can still be understood, after all, the merchants only care about gold coins, then the bards make it completely impossible to understand what they are thinking. Although they collect intelligence, most of that information has been processed by the bards, and it is difficult to tell whether it is true or false. Moreover, they are not doing it for money, and sometimes they just want to instigate a fight between two nobles, and they keep releasing some gossip. Fire information. No, you are my king, and your identity will not change because of your denial. But according to the investigation, weren't you still Weskier's retainer before? Are you planning to surrender after losing the battle? Linde was actually a little confused. After all, the bard could obviously escape directly, so why did he have to stay with him? Because we were still very confused before, and a new storm is about to break out in this world, but we still haven't found the starting point of the epic. We can only continue to expand our goals and include all possible people among the candidates for the epic starting point. After listening, Linde became even more confused. What is the new storm? What is the starting point of the epic? Seemingly seeing Linde's doubts, Lucanus said, My king, I am your jester, I must know everything about you. I believe you can also see that the demons have begun to come out of the eternal frozen soil, the human empire has split, and subsequent kingdoms have also begun to fall apart. The Angevin dynasty in the south has begun to reform, and the cultists have begun to move around. The aliens are waiting for the self of mankind just like in the past. Collapse, ready to seize the glory of mankind. And we, as witnesses of history, need to find the starting point of this epic story and witness this heroic epic. Linde probably understood that what the bard in front of him meant was that the world was about to change, and they were responsible for recording history. So you thought Weskier would be the key to a turning point in history. We still think he is. He is just a footnote in your dominance, but he is also your most perfect stepping stone. The fanaticism on Lucanus's face was undisguised, even a little crazy, like a fanatical believer. So what are you bards? Are you only responsible for recording history? Then why do you want to be spies for the nobles? Originally, Linde thought that the bards were just a group of part-time spies who sell songs, but it seems that the bards in this world are not that simple. We bards are mainly divided into two factions, namely the epic compilation school that I belong to and the other historical recording school. Lucanus seemed to really know everything about Linde, and continued, We editors believe that we can add some of our own opinions when compiling historical materials to make this period of history more magnificent, so we will record it. Choose your own fate, become a retainer of some nobles, and create some dramatic plots. As for the recorders, they are just a bunch of old-fashioned people who are neither interesting nor loyal. So that's the case, no wonder those bards would perform meaningless fire rituals just to make the epic they recorded look more exciting. So you're going to FK me too to add some drama to the epic you're recording. Linde saw that this guy really planned to say anything, so he continued to ask. No, you are different. You are not only a record in our epic, you are also our king. I have only infinite loyalty to you. Of course, you can also choose not to believe us, but our loyalty has nothing to do with whether you believe it or not. You have called yourself us from the beginning. Are your bards a group? Lucanus did not hesitate and continued to explain, No, human beings have never been united, and the same goes for us bards. Even though we are all editors, each of us has a different king or protagonist. This gave us different branches. Most of the bard groups went to the Anjou kingdom in the south, because the new king there was actively reforming, forging ahead, and reorganizing the army. It was more like the next paragraph than the Cape Tien kingdom. The winner of history. But our team is different. Fulan's body can more easily nourish new life, and heroes in adversity can attract people's attention more. From now on, you will be the only king of our Lucanus branch, and we will provide you with all the information collected by the bards of the Lucanus branch. Chapter 72. Linde was non-committal about Lucanus's answer, but he still asked Lucanus some details about the northern nobles, and waited until he left to check with others to see if it was true. Although this bard betrayed Weskier and took refuge in him, such a person cannot be completely trusted, but this bard has shown strange strength. Ordinary means cannot stop him at all. He can be in prison come and go freely. People with this ability don't need to surrender to save their lives. After Linde asked, Lucanus introduced the group of bards to Linde in detail. Just like professional mages are filled with various strange schools, bards also have their own magic, but these magics are non-lethal and only have the function of stealth and detection. Their frontal combat power is probably no match for a big goose. But Linde always felt that it was not that simple, because no bard's magic had ever been spread, and no one knew which system of magic the bards used. These bards were also unusually low-key, and ordinary people looked like they were selling their songs. There's no difference. Linde, who noticed this, continued to ask, Are you bards still recruiting people? Or how do you bards recruit your members? As long as an organization needs to survive, it must need new blood. So how to ensure that these new blood will act in accordance with the rules and dogma? No, my king, we don't need to recruit people. The total number of our bards has not changed since the birth. Of course, in order to collect intelligence more efficiently, we will develop some offline organizations, but those cannot a true bard. My king, do you know what is most needed to witness history? A strange smile flashed across Lucanus's face, and he answered his own question. It's a lifespan longer than that of elves. Linde was slightly shocked by this answer, but he quickly nodded and calmed down. There are gods in this world. Isn't it normal for some strange things to happen? So actually you bards are a group of creatures that live longer than elves, like to make fire, and are responsible for recording history, right? No, my king, I assure you, we are human beings. Lucanus's tone was no longer like that of a jester trying to make people happy before, and his expression was more serious than ever when he said these words. We have always been human and always will be. Linde was startled. How come the human beings mentioned by this man were different from what he understood? But at least he understood that the bard cared very much about his identity as a human being. Before leaving, Linde asked Lucanus one last question, so, what can you bards bring to me? Intelligence, as long as our branch can set foot in any place, we can provide you with information about that place. Of course, other areas can also be used, but the scope of influence of different branches is different. Our control over other areas is slightly weaker. The authenticity of the intelligence can only be discerned by yourself. Of course, bards are not omnipotent. At the level of ordinary spies, it would be difficult for bards to penetrate places where complete control was implemented before Grey Collar. Lucanus is a special individual. At the same time, we have also brought you a gift, which I believe will be a solid help for you on your way forward. As for what it is, you will know when you wake up tomorrow morning. After roughly understanding what the bard was about, Linde did not rush to recruit him, but planned to observe for a while. Lucanus indeed knew everything, but he also deliberately hid some things. For example, when Linde asked what these bards were, Lucanus just answered vaguely that he was a human being, so that Linde did not have to worry. In view of the fact that there is indeed a lack of intelligence departments in the territory, Linde still accepted Lucanus's kindness, but Lucanus needed to compile a booklet of his sphere of influence and his subordinates and give it to Linde. Although the origin of the other party is unknown and mysterious, as Lucanus said, his loyalty will not change because of Linde's denial. Accepting Lucanus will at least ensure that these people are under Linde's control. The next morning, Linde got up as usual, and soldiers continued to escort the escaped nobles back to the camp to take custody of them. Linde also smiled at these soldiers as usual. But Linde was keenly aware that the way these soldiers looked at him had changed. This was not because Linde had just won the battle, but because he had another emotion, more respect and curiosity, or the eyes of these soldiers were full of the desire to gossip. Linde, who came to the temporary canteen to have breakfast with everyone, immediately became the focus of the audience. Although it was usually the same, today was particularly different. Many people seemed to have something to say. Linde, who was confused, was eating breakfast while looking at the latest report. At this time, Reina also came over, sat down opposite Linde with breakfast, and looked up and down Linde's body. If you have something to say, just say it. Linde couldn't stand it anymore and decided to see what these people were curious about. Brother, are you a descendant of the Roma Empire? What descendant? I don't know. Linde took a sip of soup and finished his breakfast in 3 strokes. Are these people curious about this? The original owner of this body has no memory of this at all. He is an out-and-out frontier. The Viscount has nothing to do with the so-called descendants of the Empire. It's the human empire from thousands of years ago. There are rumors outside that you, brother, are the royal descendants of that empire. Reina looked serious and seemed to really believe this rumor. Really? Then why don't I know? And it was 1,000 years ago. Can I still inherit the throne of that empire? This kind of thing that is true at first sight but is judged to be false is believed by some people, which makes Linde unable to understand. It seems that people in this era are so lacking in entertainment methods that this kind of baseless gossip can spread. It is also time some military activities have been carried out. It is said that the royal bloodline of the Roma Empire all have black hair and black eyes. Aren't they exactly the same as you, brother? As soon as Reina finished speaking, everyone's eyes were attracted, as if they were waiting for Linde's answer. Why are they all the same? I'm not the only one with black hair and black eyes. Besides, more than 1,000 years have passed. I'm afraid no one knows what the descendants of the royal family of that empire look like now. I can't have black hair and black eyes now. Are all the people here so-called descendants of the royal family? Linde didn't know why, so he packed up his things and prepared to leave with the report. This is also the thinking of normal people. It has been more than 1,000 years. Who cares about the royal bloodline? And in the world before Linde traveled over, as long as there are people who are still alive, who has not had rich ancestors. Pets only look at bloodline. But obviously, Linde underestimated the influence of this public opinion in the feudal world. Chapter 73. Brother, are you really not? Reina jumped behind Linde and asked this question repeatedly. Linde, who had just dealt with a group of prisoners, could only answer patiently, it's really not, what does it matter even if it is? How long has it been since that empire was destroyed? But the Duchess of the South is a descendant of the Roma Empire. She has black hair and black eyes like your brother. She is also a distant relative of Caroline. Her family has a genealogy to prove it. Reina didn't give up, and actually went to read the history of aristocratic families, which she once hated the most. This course was similar to Reina's listening to Linde's report, and it was an excellent book for falling asleep. So with black hair and black eyes, he must be the so-called descendant of the empire? Where did you hear this from? Linde was really speechless. Is this really so important? At this time, Caroline happened to rush to the camp from grey and white collar and explained, black hair and black eyes may not necessarily be the case, but the descendants of the empire must have black hair and black eyes. Because of Caroline's special status, although she is a professional, Linde did not let her join the war, but allowed her to stay comfortably at the rear to organize production. Now that the situation has been decided, Caroline finally has the opportunity to come out and breathe. As Madame said, my distant cousin, the Duchess of the Southern Territory, is a descendant of the empire. I also have the blood of the empire, so I also have black hair. So what is the use of this so-called imperial bloodline? Linde asked. It has no obvious use. But Lord, are you really of imperial blood? If so, we might be related. No, at least since I was born, my family has never said anything about it. But Lord, this matter is being spread outside. Even the noble captives are also crazy to prove that you are indeed a descendant of the empire. After all, they are also nobles from the north. The testimony is very convincing force. Caroline was also a little unsure. If these nobles were trying to save face for themselves and said that they had lost to the blood of the ancient empire, then that would make sense. However, many nobles spoke with certainty, and even said that they had seen the family tree of the royal family, something that even the original owner of Linde's body had never seen before. Of course, none of this can be key evidence. What confuses Caroline the most are the potions used to treat the crowds at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Because of the disguise and the fact that it has always been a top secret matter, Caroline has not been exposed to the secret of the holy water, and until now she still thinks that it might have been Linde who brought it from his hometown on the border. How could a down-and-out viscount dig out a bunch of mysterious potions from his hometown that were as effective as holy water? Caroline had never believed it. There was no way to explain it, but if Linde didn't say anything, Caroline could only acquiesce that this was the case. But now everything makes sense. Those potions were indeed dug out by Linde from his hometown, and Linde had even mastered the method of making such potions. Isn't this the lost technology of the ancient empire? Coupled with the formula of the mysterious white sugar and recovery potion, it turns out that everything comes from the ancient empire. This is not surprising. Didn't Caroline's distant cousin's family in the south rely on the technology left over from the empire to become the Duchess of the South? The logic was so smooth that no problem could be found. In Caroline's mind, she had already determined that Linde was also a descendant of the ancient empire, so Caroline hurriedly wrote a letter to her family this morning. You must know that when the family contacted Caroline before, she read them all and failed to reply. But this time, not only did Caroline reply, but she also responded very formally. The letter was sent to the royal capital as quickly as possible. If this is the gift Lucanus said he gave to himself, Linde is still a little disappointed. The so-called descendants of the empire have no substantial benefits, and it is very troublesome to prove. Moreover, the empire has been dead for many years. Can you still get a claim based on this thing without any evidence? At this time, Linde had no idea that everyone had more or less completed a logical closed loop similar to Caroline's. Especially the defeated nobles, they even bit to death that Linde was a descendant of the empire who had been lurking for a long time, pretending to be a pig and eating the tiger, and then surrendered with peace of mind. To the descendants of the empire. I really am not. Linde explained feebly. But Caroline gave an I understand look. Although Augustine III made a very generous gesture and allowed the family of the descendant of the Mingpai Empire to guard the important southern border, it is impossible to say that there is no defense at all, especially since there is already a descendant of the empire who has become in the case of the Duke. Other descendants of the empire will definitely be doubly wary. After finally getting rid of Caroline, Raina was still following Linde. Brother, there are only two of us here. Just tell me the truth. I will never tell anyone else. I promise, no matter whether you are a descendant of the empire or not, brother, I will support you. I'm really not. Linde continued to explain feebly, but to Linde's expectation, Raina believed it easily this time, and seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and relax. Well, I believe you. After leaving these words, Lina left. At this moment, Linde was even a little moved. He didn't expect that Lina would really believe in him unconditionally. At this time, the Nun army also came back and brought good news. They captured Wesgear. Flora felt a little emotional. After abandoning the secular Holy See and simply serving the goddess and the Lord, the goddess seemed to have really favored her again. Just her daily prayers before eating actually came true. And Wesgear also knew that even if he was not the instigator, he was still to blame, and it was impossible to surrender. But at this time, Wesgear did not have the decadence of yesterday, but was somewhat high-spirited, and even made people doubt for a moment who had won. Wesgear, who was being escorted, raised his head and glanced at Linde, and then said with emotion, as expected, he is a descendant of the empire. I did not lose unjustly. This is not over yet, Linde cursed in his mind. At this time, Lori and Yolanda also came back. The troops Lori was responsible for this time did not have full equipment, so they only pursued them symbolically, and then began to clean up the battlefield. Lord, these are the two smart boys I found. I want to incorporate them into my team, is that okay? Lori brought Sean and Colin over. After the introduction, he walked up to Linde and asked quietly, Boss, are you really a descendant of the empire? No. Linde replied with a straight face. Seeing that Linde was not in a very good mood, Lori immediately retreated obediently. But at this time, Sean, who looked like a civilian husband, came forward and asked, "Lord, are you a descendant of the Empire?" Chapter 74. Linde directly interrupted the topic and said, "Let's report the results first." Seeing Linde change the topic, Lorry became even more curious. He always felt that Linde was trying to cover up the situation, but he had no choice but to start reporting to Linde. The 50,000-man army was very watery, but almost all the nobles in the western part of the northern border participated in this battle. Although the coalition forces of the nobles who had not yet entered the valley were finished, the heads of the coalition forces could be said to be dead. Cast. The coalition forces in the middle section of the valley were not much better. The good news was that they did not have to face Lars's knights and ray guns. The bad news was that they suffered the most casualties due to being blocked at both ends because of the crowd pushing and the horses losing control. It probably killed more people than the artillery. As for those professionals who managed to escape in the end, Lorry did not pursue them hard. According to the practice of aristocratic wars, Linde can ask for a large amount of ransom and land this time, but this is not an ordinary aristocratic war, and there is no need for Linde to abide by the so-called aristocratic rules against this group of people who broke the rules first, so this time Linde plans to swallow as much territory as he can. There is no turning back now. It is impossible to chat with these nobles anymore. Linde must absorb a large amount of land and population to complete his subsequent series of research. Includes lathe, power source, new gunpowder, and magic stone tower. Although all the grey and white-collar population may not be able to control the huge territory that follows, the old butler Sabas has already sent a message to the Lars elders in Winter Castle. Linde needs Lars's prestige and population. Come and help yourself manage the next territory. After Lowry's report, Linde praised the two civilian husbands alone. The two civilian husbands seemed young and could be trained as officers in the future. The grey-collar workers were already rushing to produce medals to encourage these civilians. For the warriors who fought bravely in this battle, Linde even planned to publicize and encourage these two civilians as models of the battle. After hearing Linde's praise for themselves, Sean and Colin were extremely excited and saluted Linde with a newly learned military salute. At this time, the old housekeeper brought Ruby to the camp. Ruby excitedly jumped out of the old housekeeper's arms and ran to Linde's side. "Brother-in-law. We won the battle, right?" "That's right, the bad guys were all beaten away by my brother-in-law." Linde knelt down and touched Ruby's head lovingly. At this time, Ruby turned her head and glanced at the two civilian husbands beside her, and shouted excitedly, "Brother! You are still alive! Brother-in-law, have you found Brother Sean and Brother Colin? Brother-in-law is so awesome!" After the old housekeeper ran over, he shouted as excitedly as Ruby, "Master, it's great, you are still alive!" The whole place fell into an eerie silence. Seeing this, Sean had no choice but to come out and explain, "Let me introduce you again, I am Sean Lars, and this is my brother, Colin Lars. Brother-in-law, we are really happy to meet you." Linde's face immediately darkened, and he silently withdrew his praise for these two people. Did these two people have a bad relationship with Reina? Why did they remain silent even when they arrived in Faison town, and secretly became civilian husbands? Moreover, Linde originally assumed that these two brothers-in-law were either dead or missing. If these two men showed up, then I am afraid that the Lars in Winter Castle would turn around and support these two men. For a moment, Linde even thought about killing him, but this idea was quickly eliminated by Linde. Not to mention that these two people were also relatives of Reina. If they died on their own territory, it would be a big problem, and when did I become so cold-blooded? Looking at the excited two people, Linde just nodded, his attitude obviously not as enthusiastic as before. But Sean and Colin were not affected at all. Sean even said directly, "Brother-in-law, actually we still have some scattered guards in and around Faison town. We will gather these guards to help brother-in-law clean up the mess. From now on, it's all up to my brother-in-law to make the decision." After hearing this, Linde's face looked a little better. Although the two brothers were still indulging in Linde's previous commendation, the old butler Sebastian had already understood from Linde's face. Linde's position is indeed very difficult now. He originally thought that he could rely on this victory to successfully integrate the remaining Lars, but now that there are suddenly two more reasonable successors to Lars, everyone will definitely have difficulties. The old butler has already seen that Sean and Colin do not have the ability to integrate and revitalize Lars, but out of loyalty to Grand Duke Lars, the old butler does not know how to make a choice. Not long after, Reina also saw her two younger brothers. The brothers and sisters hugged each other, cried and comforted each other, and they looked like a happy reunion. Subsequently, many nobles wrote letters disowning Weskier and then sent large sums of money in the hope that Linde could release the prisoners of his family. This time, because the nobles brought their own family's descendants to guild, many families now lost their heads and heirs at the same time, but Linde suppressed them until Lars' boat reappeared on the River of Tears. Probably because Linde won the battle, and the attitude of the royal capital seemed to have changed slightly, the pressure on Winter Castle dropped sharply. This time the big ship brought not only supplies, but also Lars. The elders of the family. Although these elders are not Lars' direct descendants, they all have a decisive position, but that's all. After all, under the feudal system, no matter how powerful the elders are, they can't have more say than Lars's orthodox heir. Grand Duke Si did not choose to push Sean to the top simply because he was afraid of causing chaos, not because he was unable to do it. The elders came here mainly to confirm with Linde the transfer of power of the Lars family. After all, Ruby was too young. Judging from the past, the only heir to the line of Lars' eldest son was Reina. Reina has no governance ability, and Linde is completely in charge. Therefore, the elders originally wanted to give the false name of heir to Reina, and give the real power to Linde. This would at least continue the existence of the Lars family and not the orthodox position was stolen by those Lars traitors. But now a change has occurred. Sean and Colin, who have been missing for a long time, have appeared. The elders suddenly have two new successors. The best outcome is of course to let Linde continue to work for the Lars family, and then Colin or Sean inherit the remaining inheritance of the Lars family. The worst outcome is just a quarrel between the two parties, and then the elders use the resources of the Lars family supported the two brothers. Because the elders have eaten to death, Linde now needs the population of the Lars family to help control the territories of those nobles. If Linde refuses, Winter Castle can send troops to directly take over the territories of the defeated nobles in the name of Lars. After all, isn't it true that Linde is fighting for the legitimacy of Lars and avenging Grand Duke Lars? Then it's normal for our Lars family to take over, right? Even if the situation is now stabilized by Linde, even if Linde's reputation has gradually begun to rise, even if there are rumors that Linde is a descendant of the ancient empire, these elders are not willing to give up a chance. Because the example of Augustine is still before us. Augustine I occupied the magpie's nest through his son-in-law's identity. Linde is now a replica of Augustine I in the eyes of the elders. He has a stronger record, but the power under his command is not enough. If Linde were to take over the Lars family like this, it would not be much better than being killed by the traitor on the other side. With this mentality, the elders entered Faison town. Chapter 75. In the conference room, Linde looked around and saw that the elders of the Lars family were really just a bunch of old men. He looks very stereotypical, and you can tell at a glance that he is a highly respected elder. Reina was a little nervous around Linde, probably because she couldn't learn etiquette as a child and was often lectured by these elders. Sean, on the other hand, is much more confident. After all, he is the next generation of the Lars family who has the most high hopes. The future head of the family will have a much higher status than these elders. Colin and Ruby were a bit of a rivalry. Without the support of the Elder Council, Ruby was unable to manage the territory on her own. Colin had a criminal record and his previous territory management was in a mess, so there were fewer elders to support Colin. Although these elders have different thoughts, the leader, the great elder who looks like Gandalf, is kind-hearted. On behalf of the Lars family, I would like to thank Viscount Linde Roar for his just act. The Lars family will remember your kindness. Forget the polite words, let's get straight to the point. After Linde calmly accepted the etiquette of these elders, he spoke directly and lazily talked nonsense with these old men. These ineffective aristocratic etiquette directly wasted precious time. Every minute of the time we just won is very precious, and every second determines the future direction of the western part of the north. Many elders were very dissatisfied with Linde's disrespect for etiquette, but the great elder was very cooperative and omitted most of the etiquette. If the initial plan is followed, Winter Castle will put all the remaining population, territory, resources, and power of the Lars family under the name of the Grey White Collar. After all, grey collar workers are nominally the joint assets of husband and wife. This will not only allow Linde to gain substantial power, but also ensure Reina's status. But after learning the news about Sean and Colin on the ship, the opinions among the elders were not unified. Linde opened the map and drew a large circle in the western part of the northern border. This circle basically includes all the nobles who are going on this expedition. This area will all be Lars territory from now on, but I need the population and the army to help me control these places. An elder jumped out and said, "Isn't this natural? These nobles were originally vassals of our Lars family, and now we, Lars, just want to take back these territories. This is weakening Linde's achievements, because these places were originally Lars places, so Linde did not defeat the enemy, but helped regain Lars territory. It is certain to help recover these territories, but whether it is enfeffing new lords or the troops stationed on the land, our Lars family should be responsible for it." This directly excluded Linde from being a Lursian citizen. Before the war, everyone hoped that Linde could raise the banner of Lursian orthodoxy, but after the war, no one thought that Linde would truly become a Lursian. Viscount Roll, your territory is probably enough in this area. Another elder stood up and drew a line on the map. This elder thought that he was quite fair. After all, the new territory drawn for Linde on the map was several times larger than Grey White Collar and Faison Town combined. Linde refused directly, "No, you may have misunderstood. We are not dividing the territories. What we need to do is to connect all these territories into one. These territories should only obey one order. Of course, the same goes for the army." Seeing that these elders had not yet reacted, Linde continued, "You can understand that this large area will no longer be divided into noble lords, but will be directly managed by officials. From now on, the noble titles will only be honorary titles and will not hold real power. Don't control the military." Hearing this, some elders immediately reacted. This Linde wanted to become a great lord, directly monopolize an entire territory, and even planned to establish a country within a country. These elders did not understand what Linde was thinking behind the scenes. The so-called division of noble titles and real power was also considered by these elders as a means to divide Lars' power. After all, the Lars family probably had the most noble titles. Immediately, some elders stood up to object, and the voices of opposition grew more and more. I originally thought that everyone was here to discuss business, but I didn't expect that Linde planned to monopolize all the benefits, although these benefits were originally obtained by Linde. The most common way to divide the cake in this world is to enfeff. In the eyes of these elders, Linde's refusal to enfeff and manage the territories of these nobles is a refusal to divide the cake. They originally came with the mentality of being able to manage the territory. But Linde told them there was no way. But the kind elder narrowed his eyes at this time. In any case, even if I do as you say, the person who manages this large territory should be the heir of our Lars family. Do you want to take the Lars family as your own? A slightly younger elder among a group of old men stood up and loudly accused Linde. At the same time, many people began to echo, that's right, don't think that just because you are a descendant of the empire, you can do whatever you want. What this great lord wants to do should be done by the legitimate heir, Mr. Sean. Linde was a little helpless to complain. Why did these elders know about this? However, this was within Linde's expectation. It was impossible to eat the entire Lars family in one go. He had already made preparations with these people. The elders prepared to bargain. But at this moment Reina stood up, took out a battle axe from somewhere, stepped on the negotiation table and reprimanded loudly, Linde is my husband, why can't he be counted as Lars's? Perhaps because Reina's actions were too threatening, the chattering conference room fell silent instantly. You all didn't support my brother at first, but supported my uncles, and now you are clamoring for my brother to be the heir. I finally understand that it doesn't matter to you who is the heir. You just want our Lars family to quarrel as long as possible. The longer the quarrel is, the higher your status will be and the more things you can take. You good-for-nothing beasts. You couldn't see the conspiracy when Grandpa was here. When Grandpa got into trouble, you didn't go to rescue him at all. How can you have the dignity to represent Lars? The old butler Sabas, who had been in the corner, nervously pulled Reina and whispered, Miss, at least they didn't surrender. But Reina ignored the dissuasion of the old housekeeper and said directly, I don't want the title of Lars heir. I just want to choose my husband to be the heir of the Lars family. After I have said this, who is in favor and who is against? The elders looked at each other in confusion. The last time this happened was the previous royal family and the Augustine family. Although the Augustine family did turn the tide in the end, the previous royal family also retreated to the background. How could these elders not be worried? At this time, an elder glanced at Sean, who had been silent, and said loudly, I object. This heir should also be inherited by young Master Sean. Miss, you have not participated in the successor war before, so what qualifications do you have to give it to you? Her husband will be the heir. Before the elder had finished speaking, and even as Reina had just raised her axe without making a move, Sean stood up and slapped the elder directly. The elder turned and rolled in the air and landed freely, looking at Sean with a puzzled look on his face. Sean said directly, I agree with my brother-in-law to be the heir. He is the one everyone hopes for. As soon as these words came out, many elders showed expressions like I am ready to fight to the death, why does your majesty surrender first? But the elder who had been thinking about something at this time finally said, the eldest lady is right. Thanks to Mr. Linde, we can resolve this crisis. I also agree with the eldest lady and Master Zion's views. From now on, Mr. Linde Roar will serve as the head of the Lars family and become the new leader of our Lars family. Although the elder of the National People's Congress was still smiling at this time, the other elders saw the great elder's voice and chose to worship him. The head of the family is actually the position of Archduke Lars in the Lars family before. Within the family, status is not only judged by official title, but by seniority within the family. Linde's status can even be said to be beyond that of the original heir. Position, he immediately became the supreme leader of the Lars family in one step. Even when talking to the so-called new Lars on the other side in the future, Linde will have to sit in the main seat. Linde looked at the great elder with some surprise, but the great elder just nodded with a smile. The meeting ended in a strange atmosphere, and many elders left disappointed, but Colin stopped the elders who had criticized Linde after the meeting. The elders who were stopped by Colin were a little nervous and a little excited. After all, in the impression of these elders, Colin was cruel and tyrannical. He used to take advantage of himself as the most favored youngest son and frequently attacked the elders. This is not a positive role. The elders speculated that Colin was dissatisfied with his brother-in-law and was ready to cause trouble. But Colin looked at these elders, took the whip handed by the attendant, and said in a cold tone, you seem to be a little disrespectful to your brother-in-law. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you are notified of future uploads. You can find the next parts in the playlist visible on the screen or on my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.